Project 2025, 9-page mandate for leadership, part 7, read by Adriane Mayes, president of CCC Because We Care Foundation. Good afternoon. The second part of part 7, reading about Project 2025. Head out for more information about Project 2025, the policy agenda, personnel database, training, the 180-day playbook at project2025.org. You can find out more information in this video and in the previous videos. You're finding out information reading the playbook. Adriane Mayes, not adding any type of additions, reading the mandate for leadership that can be found right on the website that I showed you quickly and easily, that you can actually take advantage and take a look at yourself. The mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, Project 2025. So taking on and moving forward on part 7, we're currently on page 295 out of 922, and encouraging people to read before even making an opinion, before even considering any other aspects. Read what the actual document is first. And as you can see, it's found simply and easily online in the steps that I just showed you in part 7. So starting on page 295 out of 922, the whole goal is to finish the actual document. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Project 2025, 900-page mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. International religious freedom. Conservatives believe international religious freedom is central to U.S. aid's development efforts. President Trump's Executive Order 13926 on advancing international religious freedom instructed the Secretary of State, in consultation with the U.S. aid administrator, to budget at least $50 million a year for programs that advance international religious freedom and ensure that faith-based and religious entities, including eligible entities in foreign countries, are not discriminated against on the basis of religious identity or religious belief when competing for federal funding. Under the Trump administration, the agency set up a senior level and sorry, my phone rang. Under the Trump administration, the agency set up a senior level chief advisor for international religious freedom, who reported directly to the administrator with the task of coordinating the whole of U.S. aid approach to achieving this priority. It created a robust genocide response capability. U.S. aid affirmed the agency's partnership with faith-based organizations through its rule on participation by religious organizations in U.S. aid programs, partnership guidance and answers to frequently asked questions, FAQs, for faith-based organizations, and legal guidance and answers to FAQs for U.S. aid staff. Today, U.S. aid officials and their progressive partners have resisted efforts to promote religious freedom, especially as it relates to abortion and gender ideology, which are anathema to the traditional societies where U.S. aid funds programs, in addition to many U.S. taxpayers. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken repudiated his predecessor's focus on religious freedom. The next conservative administration must champion the core American value of religious freedom, which correlates significantly with poverty reduction, economic growth, and peace. It should train all U.S. aid staff on the connection between religious freedom and development, integrated into all of the agency's programs, including the 5-year country development and coordination strategies due for updates in 2025, strengthen the mission's relationship with local faith-based leaders, and build on local programs that are serving the poor. Congress should appropriate funding to U.S. aid specifically to support persecuted religious minorities in line with Executive Order 13926, streamlining procurement and localizing the partner base. U.S. aid is a grant-making and contradicting agency that disperses billions of dollars of federal funding in developing countries through implementing partners such as UN, agencies, international NGOs, for-profit companies, and local non-government entities. In rare instances, such as Jordan and Ukraine, the agency provides direct budget support to finance the operations of host country governments. U.S. aid far more often counts on expensive and ineffective large contracts and grants to carry out its programs. It justifies these practices based on speed and a lower administrative burden on its institutional capacity. Partnering in procurement reform was a pillar of the Trump administration's effort to secure better development results, cut costs, and advance the journey to self-reliant strategy of exiting countries from aid. In December 2018, USAID launched its first acquisition and assistance strategy to streamline procurement processes, introduce innovation into its programming, and diversify its partner base away from large, expansive, and partisan implementers. The strategy counted on local NGOs, including faith-based entities already on the ground, to provide the agency with less costly and more effective alternatives to the aid giants. The strategy also prioritized global partnerships with the private sector corporations, investors, diasporas, and private philanthropies, the source of real capital investment, innovation, and efficiencies that can maximize the impact of taxpayer dollars. Under the Biden administration, despite rhetoric to the contrary, the aid industrial complex has recaptured the agency and stifled further reforms. The next conservative administration should immediately implement language on key policy topics as standard provisions in all grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts. These provisions should include language on implementing the policy on protecting life in foreign assistance, imposing conditions on funding to multilateral organizations, and increasing accountability and transparency. To ensure that USAID exercises its existing authorities to streamline procurement processes, the next conservative administration should name a political appointee as the agency's senior procurement executive and director of the agency's Office of Assistance and Acquisitions, OAA, in the Bureau of Management, ILM. The head of ILM, OAA, is one of the most important positions at USAID, as the office is ground zero for controlling the disbursement of U.S. foreign aid. The White House should empower the administrator and his or her designees to make determinations concerning the scale and scope of awards and increase the transparency and accountability of subawards, which can escape public scrutiny and promote progressive policies during conservative administrations. USAID should use existing authority to use program funds to expand its roster of contracting and agreement officers to accelerate the delivery of funds for disaster responses to a more diverse collection of implementers. Accomplishing the next conservative administration's policy goals at USAID will require that political appointees have knowledge of, responsibility for, and visibility into the design and awarding of grants, contracts, and cooperative agreements. The administration should restore the Senior Official Accountability Review, SOAR, or create a similar process to ensure that proposed programs above a certain dollar threshold in total estimated costs, total estimated amount, receive a close review by policymakers in each bureau and office, and for large awards in the agency's front office. Localization is a buzzword within the aid community, but correctly assumes that more funding through local organizations produces better aid outcomes. Shifting from giant US-based implementers has proved difficult to achieve. However, given intense internal bureaucratic resistance, opposition from the aid industrial complex, and foot dragging from progressives who view local NGOs, especially faith-based NGOs, prominent in Africa and Latin America, as obstacles promoting abortion, gender radicalism, climate extremism, and other woke ideas. The President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, has shown that localization at scale is possible within a short time span. Over the 4 years of the Trump administration, the multi-billion-dollar program increased the amount of funding dispersed to local entities from about 25% to nearly 70% with positive overall results. This model should be replicated across all of US aid. In addition, the next conservative administration should expand use of the new Partnership Initiative, NPI, to every bureau and office, reset the requirements for USAID's overseas missions to craft and execute NPI action plans, and assign each mission a minimum percentage of its portfolio that must go to new, underutilized, and local partners. Crucial to the strategy will be increasing the use of open competition that lowers barriers to entry and fits demand awards that carry less of a compliance burden, along with eliminating cost plus reimbursement contracts that favor large companies. Before advancing a new program, the agency should be required to assess existing local activities to avoid undercutting or duplicating them. At every opportunity, USAID should build on existing local initiatives. Global health. The United States is the world's largest funder of global health initiatives. For more than 60 years, the American people have offered health assistance to the world and saved millions of lives. The U.S. Aid Bureau for Global Health, GH, the second largest within USAID, oversees a multi-billion-dollar operation to support maternal and child health, voluntary family planning, PEPFAR, and the President's Malaria Initiative, PMI, both started under President George W. Bush, and other initiatives against other infectious and neglected tropical diseases. Effective use of funds is essential to maximize care for the world's neediest people. Countries with strong health institutions and sound public health practices responded quickly to and recovered more rapidly from the COVID-19 pandemic. This demonstrates the importance of localization, by which USAID helps governments and the private sector in developing countries to strengthen their own ability to address needed training, services, accountability, and organizational capacity. Unfortunately, many USAID-funded global health activities remain rooted in patterns that began decades ago and measure improvements in terms of inputs, money spent, instead of outcomes achieved. From the 1950s to the 1970s, the major recognized threats to human health were infectious diseases such as polio and smallpox, and USAID-funded programs in a country, not with a country. Maternal and child health, food, water, and sanitation programs were often intermittent. USAID consistently financed population control, contraception, and abortion as essential to development. Most programs focused on one disease or condition but had little integration with other global health activities. Chronic diseases were ignored. Consequently, the next conservative administration should focus on updating the Global Health Bureau's portfolio, emphasizing a comprehensive approach to supporting women, children, and families, building host country institutional capacity, increasing awards to local and faith-based partners, expanding what occurred during the Trump administration with the NPI, and improving USAID's ability to coordinate with local partners. Updating funding priorities. The Bureau should identify and eliminate outdated and ineffective concepts and focus on funding innovation. A rigorous review is necessary to ensure that current programs and funding streams avoid wasting taxpayer dollars and prioritize what is needed now and what works. Focusing on holistic healthcare and support for women, children, and families. The continued high rate of maternal and infant mortality is a persistent global tragedy. Contrary to current publicity, this problem is not solved by abortion. Families genuinely cherish children. The next leadership at USAID must focus attention on women and children's health, including unborn children, as well as health risks across lifespans, including childhood infections, cervical cancer, adolescent risks, and family stability by utilizing a coordinated approach. The Bureau should implement a request for application for resilient families that harvest collaborative funds from silo programs and makes individuals and the family, not diseases or conditions, the true focus of intervention. Increasing U.S. aid collaboration with faith-based organizations. FBOs historically have been much more successful in outreach to remote and vulnerable populations based on trust built through decades of service. The value of collaborating with FBOs was demonstrated in the October 2020 Evidence Summit on Religious Engagement. In sub-Saharan Africa, FBOs often provide more than 80% of healthcare, especially to the extremely poor. In contrast, the Global Health Bureau historically has provided 85% of its funding to large US NGOs with significant overhead costs, as a result of which only 20% to 30% of funding reaches people in need. Leveraging the strength and experience of presidential initiatives. Millions of people are alive today because of the American people's investment in PEP, FAR, and PMI. The training, laboratory, clinical intervention, health education, data collection, and organizational platforms of these programs became the bedrock for responding to the COVID pandemic. It's time for these programs to become part of an integrated, strong, and sustainable network of healthcare and public health in developing countries. A smooth transition to national ownership and funding, however, will require better coordination of USAID's own stovepipe programs with PEP, FAR, and PMI. Strengthening the collection and use of data. Good decisions are based on accurate data. For decades, global health programs have relied mostly on statistical modeling rather than actual data or survey data, the weakest type of data. Poor data quality undermines both the evaluation and improvement of desired outcomes achieved by our global health programs. The Trump administration implemented critical updates of PEP FAR systems for the collection and reporting of data to increase transparency and hold funded partners and overseas missions accountable. The next conservative administration should apply these reforms to all of the USAID's global health programs. Strengthening private sector engagement. The Bureau's Center for Innovation and Impact, CII, should be empowered to expand networks of private and faith-based health organizations that can develop projects using development impact bonds, capital bonds, and innovative technologies, including with the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the new U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. More flexible and agile CII funding will spur innovation within the Bureau and help to enhance countries' self-reliance in the provision of healthcare, improving Bureau hiring, staffing, and recruitment practices. The Global Health Bureau should address its own management challenges by modifying the high ratio of contractors to direct hires, holding career leadership accountable for effective management, and building more flexibility in emergency responses. Bureau personnel suffer from mission drift, burnout, and a lack of vision. New directives, social agendas, and extra layers of review have obscured core activities and caused talent to leave the agency. Conservative leadership must return the focus to development and improve workforce morale and focus on global outcomes and the efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Holding the UN, the World Health Organization, WHO, and other multilateral organizations accountable. Leadership should designate a political appointee to help coordinate cross-agency efforts to hold the U.S. government's multilateral partners, UN and WHO agencies, and other international organizations to a higher level of financial and programmatic accountability, including assurances that language promoting abortion will be removed from UN documents, policy statements, and technical literature. The United States must have more prominent representation in international technical committees and regulation setting organizations to ensure the proper execution of American resources, the preservation of our values, the protection of innovation, and the vitality of our biomedical sector. Global humanitarian assistance. The US government is the world's largest humanitarian actor. annually dispersing billions of dollars in life-saving assistance, food, water, shelter, emergency health care, and related protection support to tens of millions of vulnerable people. Funded by the US Congress through the International Disaster Assistance IDA account, USAID pays for nearly half of the budget of the Nobel Prize winning UN World Food Program, WFP, as well as dozens of simultaneously operations that range from responses to hurricanes in Central America to tackling outbreaks of Ebola in Central Africa and caring for millions of people displaced by ongoing conflicts. USAID's emergency responses were focused primarily on natural cataclysm such as hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes. Today, the agency spends more than 80% of its humanitarian budget on chronic man-made crises. Most of these emergency responses began years ago and absorbed billions of dollars annually with no end in sight. Every year sees financial demands grow in response to new conflicts, most recently Ukraine. The budget of the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, BHA, has doubled compared to just a few years ago, and BHA can no longer manage its funds responsibly. A politically powerful foreign aid industry that benefits financially from extending and expanding these large-scale programs for years, even decades, ensures little scrutiny of these ever-increasing appropriations. The massive growth in emergency aid distorts humanitarian responses, worsens corruption in the countries we support, and exacerbates the misery of those we intend to help. The permanence of this assistance, particularly in countries where we have little to no in-country presence and must rely on UN agencies to self-monitor, has morphed into a co-governance scheme in which the US government effectively finances the social services obligations of corrupt regimes that threaten the United States. These governments can then redirect scarce budget resources away from costly health and education toward financing their wars, supporting terrorism, repressing their citizens, and enriching themselves. Examples of this abuse are spread throughout the world. Over the past decade, the US government has expended $14 billion in aid to Syria, where the bloody regime of Bashar al-Assad, a close ally of Iran and Russia, skims nearly half of foreign aid through inflated official exchange rates, the diversion of food baskets to its military units, and procurement arrangements with compromised local contractors. Yemen, once the breadbasket of the Arabian Peninsula, is now dependent on billions of dollars of aid as formerly productive Yemen farmers cannot compete against free food, while irrigation systems remain in disrepair, leaving the country to suffer from water shortages during long summer droughts and flooding during its rainy season. Iran-backed Houthi rebels diverse substantial amounts of aid to support their war efforts. In Afghanistan, the aid infrastructure built over 20 years of American military presence that 3 presidents wanted to end collapsed with the failure of US-trained Afghan forces to repel the Taliban's 2021 advances. Yet the country has received nearly $1 billion more in US humanitarian aid since the Taliban's takeover and absent a US embassy to ensure that it is not diverted to the Taliban and other terrorist groups. In Burma, US aid finances all of the food and medical care for the hundreds of thousands of persecuted Rohingya that the military regime forces to live in open-air concentration camps. In northern Iraq, hundreds of thousands of Yazidis targeted for genocidal extermination by ISIS remain in miserable camps, unable to return home because of the Iraqi government's refusal to clear out Iran-backed militias occupying their homeland. In effect, humanitarian aid is sustaining war economies, creating financial incentives for warring parties to continue fighting, discouraging governments from reforming, and propping up malign regimes. Nefarious actors reap billions of dollars in profits from diversions of our humanitarian assistance. but so do international organizations. The WFP charges 30% in overhead, while Oxfam International's overhead has reached 70%. In Yemen, reflecting the high cost of foreign staff, security, and logistics. With powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C., and in leadership positions throughout U.S. aid and the Department of State, the aid industry adroitly exploits Congress's disposition to increase funding year on year to assist those in dire need, but provides no evidence to justify the mounting budget requests. In 2020, USAID's leadership fused formerly bifurcated food and non-food emergency relief operations into a single bureau for humanitarian assistance to improve the management of the agency's largest portfolio. But this reform was not sufficient to address the problem. The next administration should resize and repurpose USAID's humanitarian aid portfolio to restore its original purpose of providing emergency short-term relief, prepare vulnerable communities for transition, and do no harm in the following ways. Work with Congress to make deep cuts in the IDA budget by ending programs that do more harm than good in places controlled by malign actors, such as in Yemen, Syria, and Afghanistan, where our aid is consumed by fraud, diversion, and partner overhead costs. Require USAID and the State Department to devise country-based exit strategies that limit the duration of humanitarian responses and transition funding from emergency to development projects. This will require robust diplomacy to press host governments to integrate displaced persons in lieu of keeping them in expensive and dehumanizing camps financed by the international community. Transition from large awards to expensive, inefficient, and corrupt UN agencies, global NGOs, and contractors to local, especially faith-based entities that are already operating on the ground. This approach provides a far less expensive and more effective alternative for aid delivery. Local partners more ably navigate corrupt environments and are more likely to steer vulnerable populations away from dependence on aid towards self-sufficiency. Require that BHA avail itself of existing IDA authorities that it fails to use, including to dispense with the cost reimbursement model that disqualifies undercapitalized local NGOs, accept other donor vetting of local partners, streamline the award approval process, and expand the use of fixed amount awards to rein in cost overruns. Direct USAID's Bureau for Management to hire more procurement officers, for BHA to strengthen the Bureau's award management capacity and reduce the incentives to issue large awards to aid industry giants. Allow BHA to manage the process of hiring personal services contractors. Require BHA's partners to adopt stricter vetting procedures to prevent aid from being diverted to terrorists. Increase efforts to obtain greater contributions, not just pledges, for humanitarian operations from other donors and make this a condition for receiving additional U.S. aid. Leveraging foreign aid to unleash the power of America's private sector. During the 1960s, when U.S. aid was launched, 80% of financial flows from the United States to the developing world was in the form of U.S. government assistance. Today, that figure is under 10%, overtaken by private investment, remittances, and private charities, all demonstrating the power of America's private sector to promote wealth-generating economic development in poor countries. Leaders in the developing world routinely press U.S. officials about their preference for trade and investment, not aid. Instead, the Biden administration is leveraging private sector financing to promote its climate and other progressive agendas worldwide. The next conservative administration must return U.S. aid to a foreign model that leverages its resources to promote private sector solutions to the world's true development problems and in the need for future foreign aid. Private capital investment in these markets is the greatest enabler of job creation and sustainable economic growth throughout the developing world. A key tool of American soft power leadership is the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, DFC. Launched in December 2019, DFC sought to unleash the power of America's private sector to advance our interests by providing emerging markets with blending financing opportunities to help end wretched poverty, create new markets for US made products, strengthen bilateral partnerships in strategic parts of the world, and offset China's predatory loans and investments. The Trump administration launched a USAID-DFC working group to maximize development outcomes and review individual investment projects through a counter-China lens and ensure a cohesive interagency development response. As development agencies, USAID and DFC must do a better job of aligning their respective activities and closely integrate both structurally and operationally. The easiest way to foster this alignment is to dual hat the role of DFC's Chief Development Officer so that he or she serves simultaneously in both institutions. Like all US federal bodies, the DFC should be restored to its original intent of deploying its commercial risk, reducing financial services instead of its current misuse as another global vehicle to promote economy-killing climate programs, most meet irrelevant diversity objectives, and over-focus on low-impact or misguided gender-based activities. Branding. A deeply embedded culture within the foreign aid bureaucracy views public recognition of U.S. assistance as secondary to a large philanthropic mission. It is embarrassed by the American flag. Citing vaguely defined security concerns, U.S. aid's implementers, UN agencies, international NGOs, and contractors often fail to credit the American people for the billions of dollars in assistance they provide the rest of the world, even as they engage in self-promoting public relations to raise other donor funds. This approach has negative foreign policy implications as China relentlessly promotes its own self-serving efforts to gain influence and resources. Worst of all, malign actors sometimes appropriate credit for unbranded U.S. assistance. Houthi terrorists, for example, claim to provide for the people under their occupation with anonymous U.S. humanitarian aid. The United States is a struggle for influence with China, Russia, and other competitors, and American generosity must not go unacknowledged. The next conservative administration should build on the Trump administration's branding policy, which revamped ADS Chapter 3320 to force the aid bureaucracy to fully credit the American people for the aid they are providing. The senior advisor for brand management in the Bureau for Legislative and Public Affairs, LPA, discussed infra should be a political appointee who is responsible for maximizing the visibility of U.S. assistance by enforcing branding policy on every grant, cooperative agreement, and contract. The LPA should liaise with counterparts at the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM, to ensure local media pickups of these activities. Other offices and bureaus. Office of Administrator. The next conservative administration should leave in place the current structure of two presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed deputy administrators, one for policy and one for management. The deputy administrators and the chief of staff must be individuals with extensive previous service in the executive branch, ideally at foreign affairs agencies, and be fluent in the language and practice of federal procurement. Bureau for Foreign Assistance. As noted above, the next conservative administration should name the U.S. aid administrator as Director of Foreign Assistance, F, at the Department of State with the rank of Deputy Secretary. It should reorient the bulk of F staff from focusing on the formulation of the annual president's budget proposal to the execution of already appropriated resources. This should include eliminating the duplicative mission and bureau resource requests, speeding up the availability of the appropriations by delivering to Congress within 60 days the report required by Section 653A of the Foreign Assistance Act, FAA, and fast-tracking the approval of congressional notifications, CNs, and other pre-obligation requirements. Management bureaus. As indicated previously, the next conservative administration should name a political appointee as USAID's senior procurement executive and director of the agency's Office of Acquisition and Assistance, M/OAA. Political appointees with the appropriate credentials, including warrants, should be placed within M/OAA, and the agency should exercise its authority to engage qualified experts from other federal departments and agencies and outside of government, if they are free of conflicts of interest, on the technical committees that review applications for USAID's contract and grant competitions. The administration should change the designation of USAID's competition advocate to an individual favorable to innovative types of contracts that can reduce the aid of oligopolies' grip on the agency. Office of Human Capital and Talent Management. As soon as possible after Inauguration Day, the next conservative administration should name a political appointee as USAID's Chief Human Capital Officer, CHCO, and Director of Office of Human Capital and Talent Management. USAID's White House liaison must be an individual with substantial experience with federal personnel systems. The White House Office of Presidential Personnel should allow the USAID administrator to explore with counterparts at the Office of Personnel Management whether the agency could hire personnel under both the administratively determined authority and Schedule C of the accepted service of the Federal Civil Service. USAID should be the one of the agencies a pilot test a reinstated Executive Order 13957, which created a Schedule F within the accepted service, and should aggressively recruit and place candidates into term-limited positions under Schedule A of the accepted service, especially veterans. The new CHCO should examine how the existing members of the Senior Executive Services, SES, at USAID should be reworked throughout the agency and should institute an SES mobility program to encourage the regular rotation of senior career leaders, including through details to other departments and agencies. Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning. The next conservative administration should shift the policy functions of the Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning, PPL, to the Office of Budget and Resource Management, BRM, located in the Office of the Administrator. It should rename BRM the Office of Budget, Policy, and Resource Management, BPRM, and staff the policy team with political appointees. The administration should also move the responsibility for reviewing all processing proposed changes in USAID's Policy Bible, the Automated Directive System, ADS, from the Management Bureau to the new BPRM. Even before these changes, the Assistant Administrator for PPL should decree an immediate freeze on changes in the ADS and agency-wide policy documents to allow for the priority publication of amendments to reflect the new administration's viewpoint. All major agency policies should be reviewed and amended or withdrawn within the new administration's first calendar year in office. Bureau for Legislative and Public Affairs. The next conservative administration should invest no more than 10% of USAID's allocation of administrative determined politically appointed positions in the Bureau for Legislative and Public Affairs. A priority for these positions, combined with hires under Schedule A, should be the review and editing of the agency's public-facing web pages and social media accounts to eliminate material that does not conform to the new administration's policies. The agency should accelerate the review of congressional notifications within LPA and publish all CNs and congressional reports. To ensure consistency and clarity of public messaging, LPA should gain direct authority over the communication staff scattered through USAID's various bureaus and offices. LPA should expand its public-facing efforts to include, to include conservative allies that are active in global development and humanitarian aid work, including industry groups, nonprofits, trade associations, foundations, and advocacy organizations, and correspondingly reduce the aid industrial complex's grip on U.S. aid's corporate relationships. Office of General Counsel. Along with the director of M/OAA, the General Counsel is one of the 2 or 3 most important positions at U.S. aid and should be a priority for immediate appointments. Because proper legal interpretation of executive orders are internal, U.S. aid policy is crucial. The next conservative administration should recruit and appoint a commanding team of Schedule C attorneys in the Office of the General Counsel, OGC. Within weeks of Inauguration Day, OGC should issue clear guidance on the eligibility of faith-based organizations for U.S. aid funding. Office of Budget Resources and Management. The Director of Budget, Resources, and Management should be a political appointee empowered as part of the administrator's senior management team. BRM's highest priority should be to prepare the report required by Section 653A, according to the administrator's guidance, and institute a fast-track process for the submission of congressional notifications and identify already appropriated resources to reprogram immediately to fund the new administration's priorities. The new conservative administration should consider prioritizing the placing of young political appointees in BRM over LPA. Bureau for Democracy, Development, and Innovation. A key outcome of the transformation of U.S. aid undertaken during the Trump administration, the Bureau for Democracy, Development, and Innovation, DDI, is the home for most of the agency's non-health, non-humanitarian funding, as well as almost all of its sectoral appropriations directives, including those that reflect the pet projects of individual members of Congress. The Bureau is the policy and financial nexus at USAID for most of the Biden administration's radical priorities in foreign assistance, including gender, climate change, and the promotion of identity-based politics. On the positive side, DDI is also the bureau in charge of areas that will be crucial to a reorientation of USAID, including trade, economic growth, innovation, partnerships with the private sector, and the agency's relationship with communities of faith. The next conservative administration should make the rapid staffing of key DDI positions a high priority. Besides the Senate confirmed assistant administrator, the directors of each of the centers and hubs in the Bureau will need political leadership. Almost every one of the agency-wide policies that cover DDI's areas of responsibility will need to be edited or rewritten entirely as soon as possible. The next conservative administration should harvest DDI's central appropriations to fund new priorities, especially working with ethnic and religious minorities and faith-based organizations, and joint ventures with the private sector in education and energy. All DDI programs should issue funding opportunities restricted to new and underutilized partners modeled on the NPI. Regions. Asia. Asia is the most populous continent and ground zero in the battle against communist China's efforts to exploit the development needs of poor countries for geopolitical gain. America's Indo-Pacific strategy should guide USAID's approaches to dispersing foreign aid in the region. USAID should intensify its bilateral relationships with pro-free market Japan, Australia, South Korea, and India, so that they can jointly advance private sector solutions to secure financing for power generation, infrastructure, digital connectivity, investment, and trade expansion, and other economic activities. USAID enjoys a strong in-country presence in India, buttressed by recent coordination on the global response to COVID-19, as India is a global leader in vaccine production. Those ties should be expanded. So too should So too should development cooperation with Taiwan, which boasts effective pandemic response capacity that should be shared with developing countries. China's island hopping efforts to capture vulnerable Pacific states is a direct strategic threat to U.S. maritime supremacy and homeland security. And U.S. aid and its allied donors should neutralize these efforts through the deployment of targeted assistance, such as helping countries combat the effects of China's illegal fishing. While China outpaces the ability of the Democratic Alliance to deploy state backed financing to developing countries, it is unable to compete with our collective private sector capacity to deploy trillions of dollars of capital. Pakistan is a prime example of foreign aid policies disconnected from U.S. national interests. The country has been the recipient of more than $12 billion in U.S. foreign aid since 2010, yet it remains intensely anti American and corrupt, has backed the Taliban continuously since 2001, jump started North Korea's nuclear bomb program, brutalizes its religious minorities, and is a willing client of China while taking on unrepayable loans from the U.S. taxpayer funded International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Middle East. The Middle East is far more vulnerable today than it was in 2020 because the Biden administration's strategy for the region is adrift. Tunisia has slid into autocracy. Iraq is plummeting further into Iran's orbit, and U.S. soldiers continue to risk their lives for unclear ends amid the ruins of Syria. Meanwhile, billions of dollars in U.S. foreign aid props up regimes allied with Iran. President Trump's Abraham Accords signaled the end of the centrality of the Arab Israeli conflict, which paralyzed U.S. approaches to the region and focused instead on Iran as the public threat to America from this region. During the Trump administration, U.S. aid allocations reflected the new opportunities created by the accords and sought to strengthen regional alliances against Iran through expanded regional trade and investment and to promote genuine political stability tethered to strong American leadership. USAID formally partnered with the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Morocco, Qatar, and Kuwait to catalyze regional partnerships in Africa. Under the Biden administration, however, USAID has returned to a model that deepens the region's dependence on aid. A new conservative president should reset USAID's programming in the Middle East in line with other national security interests and committed to the goal of ending the need for foreign aid through development that is led by the private sector. Specifically, foreign aid must advance the Abraham Accords, increase trade and investment between Israel and its Arab neighbors, represent the most effective path toward reducing poverty, fostering the emergence of a middle class, and solidifying peace. U.S. aid should therefore focus its development assistance on countries such as Morocco and Sudan through joint investment collaboration with the more economically advanced economies such as the UAE and Israel. U.S. aid should consider cutting aid to states allied to Iran, limiting assistance in these countries to the advancement of narrow strategic priorities and support for basic American values, such as aid to persecuted religious minorities. U.S. aid continues to expend hundreds of millions of dollars in humanitarian aid to antagonistic regimes in Iraq, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories. After billions of dollars of aid and many years of effort, these countries remain hopelessly dysfunctional, a fact that exposes the failure of a foreign aid model that is disconnected to our national security and without exit strategies to promote self-reliance. We must admit that U.S. aid's investments in the education sector, for example, serve no other purpose than to subsidize corrupt, incompetent, and hostile regimes. U.S. aid should undergo operational changes to secure better development outcomes by reducing its missions footprints in the Middle East, given that most personnel in the region are unable to leave their highly protected and expensive compounds and carry out their overnight oversight functions. It should redirect program funding away from expensive and poorly performing international partners to more cost effective local entities that require a minimal US aid field presence. Africa. Since its inception, USAID has had a strong presence in Africa, saving millions of lives through its pandemic and infectious disease responses, especially for malaria and HIV/AIDS. It has led global efforts to provide life saving emergency assistance to those who are fleeing conflict and suffering from devastating natural disasters. American generosity knows no equal. Yet, the agency's efforts to reduce poverty and hunger have failed as it spends ever higher amounts of aid, partnering with a costly and ineffective aid industrial complex that has little interest in working itself out of a job. Long term, multi billion dollar humanitarian responses lack exit strategies, while numerous development projects lead neither to measurable results nor to government reforms. Despite the tens of billions of dollars spent, the continent remains poor, unstable, and riven with conflict, corruption, and Islamic terrorism. This situation has also resulted in vast illegal migration from the continent. Failure to generate wealth has provided opportunities for China to step in and become the continent's leader in trade, loans, and investment. As a result, Beijing controls most of the continent's strategic minerals that are critical to advanced technology. Moreover, US aid is criticized by Africans for exporting cultural values that are anathema to their traditional norms, further abetting Chinese continental supremacy. The Biden administration radical global climate policies have cut off billions of investments to develop clean fossil fuels, denying Africa's billion plus people access to cheap energy to further their own development and finance their own social services in health, water, education, and agriculture, while increasing its dependence on China's renewables industry. It has exacerbated hunger by increasing the cost of fertilizers to levels that many African farmers can no longer afford. Poverty inducing dependence on aid grows daily. US aid efforts in Africa require a rethink. In 2025, USAID will update its 5 year country development and cooperation strategies. This will give the next administration an opportunity to pursue a new development course for Africa that promotes economic self reliance, catalyzes private sector solutions for job creation through increased trade and investment, terminates legacy and non performing programs, and supports diversified energy approaches. Critically, it must hold China accountable for its extractive investments that violate international labor, environmental, and anti corruption norms and practices, undercut business opportunities for US companies, and sabotage Africa's development. USAID, in collaboration with the US International Development of Finance Corporation, US Department of State, US Department of the Treasury, and the US Department of Commerce's Foreign Commercial Service, should use its convening power, diplomatic heft, and risk reducing instruments to facilitate US African business relationships and expand Prosper Africa, launched by the Trump administrations to bring together services from across the US government to help companies and investors to do business in US and African markets. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, provides Africa duty-free access to US markets. The next administration should extend AGOA beyond its 2025 term, but within a strategic framework that rewards good governance and pro-free market economies policies. There's no point in wasting massive sums to aid to countries whose governments failed to keep their promises to reform. US aid should build on, not compete with, private sector initiatives launched by global churches, corporate philanthropists, and diaspora groups that have already invested billions of dollars in self-reliance based projects. Japan has committed $30 billion in aid to Africa over 3 years to stem China's economic and political grip on the continent. Gulf-based sovereign funds also are investing billions in African energy, infrastructure, mining, water, food, production, information, communications, technology, and other strategic industries. Other allied donors are promoting investment-based aid. There's no lack of funding to support Africa's economic rise. What is lacking is a strategic direction among U.S. government and foreign aid agencies. PEPFAR has saved countless lives over the years and constitutes America's most successful aid program. During the Trump administration, PEPFAR increased the share of funding to local entities from about 20% to nearly 70%, with commensurate improvements that have had lasting impact. We're on page 277 on the download, page 310 out of 922. The next administration should extend that localization model to all global health and humanitarian assistance in view of how local African entities have strengthened their capacity for direct management of U.S. programs. Correspondingly, U.S. aid should aggressively ramp down its partnerships with wasteful, costly, and politicized UN agencies, international NGOs, and Beltway contractors. All new programs in Africa should build on existing local initiatives that enjoy the support of the African people. Latin America. U.S. foreign assistance throughout the Western Hemisphere is designed to respond to national security threats that emanate from the region, such as illicit drug and arms trafficking, illegal immigration flows, terrorism, pandemics, and strategic threats from China, Russia, and Iran. Over the past decade, the United States has poured billions of dollars in security, humanitarian, and development assistance in Central America and the Andes, including $1 billion in food and non-food emergency aid to millions of Venezuelan refugees who have fled the Maduro dictatorship. U.S. aid is always first to respond to national disasters in Central America and the Caribbean and employs a network of delegated experts in the region to deliver this assistance. During the COVID pandemic, the United States provided millions of doses of vaccines and other emergency health support. Yet, years of foreign aid have failed to bring peace, prosperity, and stability to the hemisphere. Poverty, joblessness, and social unrest have led to the leftist electoral victories from Mexico to Chile. These regimes are hostile to American interests in private enterprise, breed corruption, implement radical policies that will further impoverish their people and threaten their democracies, and are more open to striking partnerships with communist China. Left-wing authoritarian kleptocracies in Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela deny their people basic freedoms, violently and ruthlessly suppress any dissent, repress communities of faith, and generate such misery that hundreds of thousands of their citizens have attempted to cross our southern border over the past 2 years. No recent administration has made any progress in reducing the chaos and desperation in Haiti. Conversely, Latin America is a major global source of energy and food, which generates substantial income that can finance internal social and economic development. The nations of the hemisphere share a natural and massive geographic trade and investment advantage through their proximity to the United States, supplemented by free trade agreements. The United States remains the favored destination for higher education and business opportunities for Latin Americans. Successful diasporas in the United States serves as powerful economic, cultural, and political bridges to every country in the region. The Trump administration focused on promoting trade and investment, especially in infrastructure, through an interagency effort called America's Crescent, America Grows, by which U.S. aid played a key role in providing technical assistance to create a more enabling environment to attract private investment. The Biden administration canceled the program. The next conservative administration should reassess all programs of U.S. foreign aid to Latin America and terminate those that have failed to achieve results after years of effort. Instead, U.S. aid should focus its resources on strengthening the fundamentals of free markets, such as clear property rights and a functioning judiciary, and on promoting labor and pension reforms, lower taxes, and deregulation in order to increase trade and investment within the region and with the United States as the genuine path to economic and political stability. Challenge the socialist ideas that have captured too many of the region's governments and their nation's youth. Fund partnerships with the private sector and support civil society groups, including university centers and think tanks that advocate for pro-free market and democratic ideas. Finally, Latin America is the perfect proving ground for reducing U.S. aid's reliance on large U.S. based implementers. And the agency should commit to shifting all of its portfolio in the region to local organizations by 2030. Personnel. The Trump administration agenda for U.S. aid was undercut from the outset both by real C-Trans career personnel and by inexperienced political personnel. The next conservative administration should implement personnel policies from the beginning so that the agency can be effectively managed accordingly to high standards. The rapid deployment of reforms will require key experienced personnel installed quickly at USAID's headquarters and missions. Delay will only impede progress. In general, areas of focus should be appointing effective lawyers in key positions, reforming career hiring, firing mechanisms, and getting a grip on the grant-making process. The administration should staff the office of the general counsel with at least 4 political appointed attorneys besides the general counsel. The general counsel should have 2 political deputies, one of whom should cover human capital and talent management, HCTM, and the other the Office of Acquisition and Assistance, OAA. The administration should name a political appointee with long experience in federal personnel systems as USAID's Chief Human Capital Officer and Director of HCTM. This appointee would help to scope and shepherd position descriptions, clearances, and other components of the hiring process that are necessary for immediate onboarding while coordinating with the White House to bring in new appointees and make internal career employee changes. On day 1, USAID should halt all agency-wide training and replace it with training modules to advance the president's agenda. The administration should appoint a senior accountable official, SAO, to report on the agency's adherence to administration policy priorities, including on protecting life in foreign assistance, critical race theory, climate change, gender, and diversity and inclusion. It should also create a program to staff hard to fill positions overseas. Finally, the administration should create a recruiting program for veterans and other groups to participate in career job opportunities at USAID. Former missionaries, veterans, members of diasporas, faith community stakeholders with overseas experience should be recruited to work at USAID on Schedule A appointments as institutional service contractors, as personal services contractors, and as foreign services officers. Conclusion: the next conservative administration will have a unique opportunity to realign U.S. foreign assistance with American national interests and the principles of good governance and more accurately reflect the U.S. taxpayers' unmatched charitable desire to help those in need. It can build on a strong baseline of conservative reforms undertaken by the Trump administration to counter communist China's strategy of world domination. However, this will require that bold steps are taken on day 1 to undo the gross misuse of foreign aid by the current administration to promote a radical ideology that is politically divisive at home and harms our global standing. All right, we are making progress. 313. What up, though, Detroit? You see that 313? Okay. Making progress. Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025, read out loud by Adriane Mayes. We are on section 3, the general warfare. Let's see. We are doing amazing. We're about an hour in. Section 3, the general warfare. I'm going to give you the percentage that we're done just because that was kind of fun the last time we did that. 1 second. That was cool. 34.2. Isn't that cool? 34.2% done right now, right around 313 page. What up, though, Detroit? Okay, I had to have a moment, right? Come on, dope. Detroit, one product, educate. Okay, section 3, the general warfare. You like that little break right there? Okay, we gotta have fun with it, right? We gotta read it so then we can talk about it. We can't talk about it until we read it. Now, this is what it is. That's how you disperse information. Now, this is page 316, 9 out of 922, section 3, the general warfare. When our founders wrote in the Constitution that the federal government would promote the general welfare, they could not have a massive bureaucracy that would someday spend $3 trillion in a single year, roughly the sum combined spent by the departments covered in this section in 2022. Approximately half of that colossal sum was spent by the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, alone. The belly of the massive behemoth that is the modern administrative state. HHS is home to Medicare and Medicaid, the principal drivers of our $31 trillion national debt. When Congress passed and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law these programs, they were set on autopilot with no plan for how to pay for them. The first year that Medicare spending was visible on the books was 1967. From that point on through 2020, according to the American Main Street Initiative's analysis of official federal tallies, Medicare and Medicaid combined cost $17.8 trillion, while our combined federal deficits over that same span were $17.9 trillion. In essence, our deficit problem is a Medicare and a Medicaid problem. HHS is also home to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the National Institute of Health, NIH, the duo most responsible, along with President Joe Biden, for the irrational, destructive, un-American mask and vaccines mandates that were imposed upon and ostensibly free people during the COVID-19 pandemic. All along, it was clear from randomized controlled trials, the gold standard of medical research, that masks provided little to no benefit in preventing the spread of viruses and might even be counterproductive. Yet the CDC ignored these high-quality RCTs, cherry-picked from political malleable observational studies, and declared that everyone except children and infants below the age of 2 should don masks. Under COVID, as former director of HHS's Office of Civil Rights, Roger Severino writes in Chapter 14, the CDC exposed itself as perhaps the most incompetent and arrogant agency in the federal government. Nor is the CDC the only villain in this play. Severino writes of the National Institute of Health. Despite its popular image as a benign science agency, NIH was responsible for paying for research in aborted baby body parts, human-animal chimera experiments, in which the genes of humans and animals are mixed, and gain-of-function viral research that may have been responsible for COVID-19. Severino writes that Anthony Fauci's division of the NIH, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, owns half the patent for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, and several NIH employees receive up to $150,000 annually from Moderna vaccine sales. That would be the same experimental mRNA vaccine that the CDC now wants to force on children who are at little to no risk from COVID-19, but at great risk from public health officials. This incestuous relationship between the NIH, CDC, and vaccine makers, with all of the conflict of interest it entails, cannot be allowed to continue, and the revolving door between them must be locked. As Sabrina writes, funding for scientific research should not be controlled by a small group of highly paid and unaccountable insiders at the NIH, many of whom stay in power for decades. The NIH monopoly on directing research should be broken. What's more, NIH has long been at the forefront in pushing junk gender science. The next HHS secretary should immediately put an end to the department's foray into woke transgender activism. HHS also pushes abortion as a form of healthcare, skirting and sometimes blatantly defying the Hyde Amendment in the process. Sabrina writes that the FDA should reverse its approval of chemical abortion drugs because the politicized approval process was illegal from the start. In addition, HHS programs often violate the spirit and sometimes the letter of conscious protection laws. Sabrina writes that the HHS secretary should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life, protect conscience rights, and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology. The next secretary should also reverse the Biden administration's focus on LGBTQ plus equity, subsidizing single motherhood, disincentivizing work, and penalizing marriage, replacing such policies with those encouraging marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. If there is another department that has gone off the rails like HHS during the Obama and Biden administrations, is the once proud Department of Justice, DOJ. As former counselor to the Attorney General, Gene Hamilton writes, in Chapter 17, the department has a long noble in history. Edmund Randolph, the first Attorney General, took office the same year as President Washington, yet its long-standing reputation has been marred by the Biden's administration abuse of the department's powers for its own end. Hamilton writes that the department's unprecedented politicization and weaponization under Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland, resulting in politically motivated and viewpoint-based prosecutions of political enemies and indifference to the crimes of political allies, has made the department a threat to the republic. The most important thing for the next Attorney General to do is to refocus the department on its core functions of protecting public safety and defending the rule of law while restoring its values of independence, impartiality, honesty, integrity, respect, and excellence. This is especially true of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, a bloated, arrogant, increasingly lawless organization, especially at the top. The FBI views itself as an independent agency that is on par with the Attorney General, rather than as an agency that is under the AG and fully accountable to him or her. To rein in this completely out of control bureau and reminded of its place within rather than at the top of the DOJ hierarchy. Hamilton writes that the FBI's separate Office of General Counsel, with approximately 300 attorneys, separate Office of Legislative Affairs, and separate Office of Public Affairs should all be abolished. Requiring the FBI to get its legal advice from the wider department would serve as a crucial check on an agency that has recently pushed past legal boundary after legal boundary. Indeed, Hamilton writes, the next conservative administration should eliminate any offices within the FBI, and it has the power to eliminate without any action from Congress. Elsewhere, DOJ should target violent and career criminals, not parents, work to dismantle criminal organizations, partly by rigorously prosecuting interstate drug activity, and restart the Trump administration's China initiative to address Chinese espionage and theft of trade secrets, with which the Biden administration terminated largely out of concern for poor optics. It should also enforce existing federal law that prohibits mailing abortifacients rather than harassing pro-life demonstrators. Respect the constitutional guarantee of the freedom of speech rather than trying to police speech on the internet, and enforce federal immigration laws rather than pretending there is no border. In contrast to DOJ's long history, the Department of Education, the Department or ED, discussed by Lindsey Burke in Chapter 11, is a creation of the Jimmy Carter administration. The department is a convenient one-stop shop for the woke education cartel, which, as the COVID era showed, is not particularly concerned with children's education. Schools should be responsive to parents rather than to leftist advocates intent on indoctrination. And the more the federal government is involved in education, the less responsive to parents the public schools will be. The department is an example of federal intrusion into a traditionally state and local realm. For the sake of American children, Congress should shutter it and return control of education to the states. We're on page 286 or 319 out of 922. Mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. Short of this, the Secretary of Education should insist that the departments serve parents and American ideals, not advocates whose message is that children can choose their own sets, that America is systemically racist, that math itself is racist, and that Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideal of colorblind society should be rejected in favor of reinstating a color-conscious society. The next head of this department will have a lot to do, hopefully culminating in the department's closure and the salutary restoration of educational control to states, localities, and parents. The next Secretary of Energy will similarly have work to do. Under the next president, the Department of Energy should end the Biden administration's unprovoked war on fossil fuels, restore America's energy independence, oppose eyesore windmills built at taxpayer expense, and respect the rights of Americans to buy and drive cars of their own choosing, rather than trying to force them into electric vehicles and eventually out of the driver's seat altogether in favor of self-driving robots. As former commissioner of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Bernard L. McNamee says in Chapter 12, a conservative president must be committed to unleashing all of America's energy resources and making the energy economy serve the American people, not special interests. In Chapter 10, Darren Bass writes that the Biden administration's Department of Agriculture claims to be transforming the food system as we know it, but the government does not need to transform the food system. Instead, it should respect American farmers, truckers, and families. In Chapter 13, former Chief of Staff at the Environmental Protection Agency, Mandy Ganushikara, writes that the EPA's current activities and staffing levels far exceed its congressional mandates and purpose, whereas its initial success in its infancy in the 1970s was a product of clear mandates, a streamlined structure, and recognition of the state's prominent role. Having since become a coercive agency full of embedded activists, its structure and mission should be greatly circumscribed. Former Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Benjamin S. Carson, writes in Chapter 15 that HUD is best with mission creep and regularly crosses the line into exercising quasi-legislative powers. In the next administration, it should refocus on its core duties and keep non-citizens from living in federally assisted housing, provide enhanced oversight of foreign ownership of U.S. real estate, and reinvigorate paths to upward economic mobility and economic self-sufficiency. In Chapter 18, former Acting Assistant Secretary of Policy at the Department of Labor, Jonathan Berry, writes that the department and related agencies should pursue pro-family, pro-worker policies to help restore the family supporting job as the centerpiece of the American economy. In lieu of the current administration's left-wing social engineering agenda, the most assertive is in history, which empowers race, gender, and climate change activists at the expense of American workers. In Chapter 19 on the Department of Transportation, DOT, former DOT Deputy Assistant Director for Research and Technology, Diana Fuchak Roth writes, in pursuit of an anti-fuel climate agenda never approved by Congress, the Biden administration has raised fuel economy requirements to levels that cannot realistically be met by most gas-powered cars, thereby reducing Americans' freedoms while increasing costs. Lastly, former acting chief of staff at the Department of Veteran Affairs, Brooks D. Tucker, echoing concerns expressed in other chapters, writes in Chapter 20 that the Veterans Affairs must be accountable to the needs and problems of veterans, not subservient to the parochial purposes of the bureaucracy. Okay. And that's page 322. So we're going to get into Chapter 10, Department of Agriculture, Darren Bass. We're on page 322 out of 922. And on the downloads, it's page 289. American farmers efficiently and safely produce food to meet the needs of individuals around the globe. Because of the innovation and resilience of the nation's farmers, American agriculture is a model for the world. If farmers are allowed to operate without unnecessary government intervention, American agriculture will continue to flourish, producing plentiful, safe, nutritious, and affordable food. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, can and should play a limited role with much of its focus on removing governmental barriers that hinder food production or otherwise undermine efforts to meet consumer demand. USDA should recognize what should be self-evident. Agricultural production should first and foremost be focused on efficiently producing safe food. This chapter provides important background on the USDA and identifies many of the USDA's specific issues that will be faced by an incoming administration. It provides specific recommendations for the next administration about how to address these issues and lays out a conservative vision for what the USDA should look like in the future. So, mission statement. The current mission statement, as stated by the Biden administration, highlights the broad scope of the USDA to serve all Americans by providing effective, innovative, science-based public policy leadership in agriculture, food and nutrition, natural resource protection and management, rural development, and related issues, with a commitment to delivering equitable and climate-smart opportunities that inspire and help America thrive. The first part of the mission statement regarding the issues covered is not new to the Biden administration. It reflects the overly broad nature of the USDA's work. However, the language bringing in equity and climate change is new to the Biden administration and part of the USDA's express effort to transform agricultural production. The USDA's new vision statement illuminates the focus of this effort: an equitable and climate-smart food and agriculture economy that protects and improves the health, nutrition, and quality of life of all Americans, yields healthy land, forests, and clean water, helps rural America thrive, and feeds the world. This effort is one of a federal central plan to put climate change and environmental issues ahead of those of the most important requirements of agriculture to efficiently produce safe food. The USDA would apparently use its power to change the very nature of the food and agriculture economy into one that is equitable and climate smart. As an initial matter, the USDA should not try to control and shape the economy, but should instead remove obstacles that hinder food production. Further, it should not place ancillary issues such as environmental issues ahead of agricultural production itself. A proper mission statement. Even before the Biden administration's radical effort to reshape the USDA's work, the USDA's mission was and is too broad, including serving as a major welfare agency through implementation of programs such as food stamps. This far reaching mission is not the fault of the USDA, but of Congress, which has given the department its extensive power. Congress must limit the USDA's role. A proper mission would clarify that the department's primary focus is on agriculture and that the USDA serves all Americans. The USDA's client is the American people, in general, not a subset of interests such as farmers, meat packers, environmental groups, etc. Within this agricultural focus, the USDA should focus and disseminate information and research the historical role of the USDA, identify and address concrete threats to public health and safety arising directly from food and agriculture, remove unjustified foreign trade barriers, blocking market access for American agricultural goods, and generally remove governmental barriers that undermine access to safe and affordable food across the food supply chain. Core principles should be included with any mission statement, including a recognition that farmers and the food system in general should be free from unnecessary government intervention. Further, there should be clear statements about the importance of sound science to inform the USDA's work and respect for personal freedom and individual dietary choices, private property rights, and the rule of law. Taking these factors into account, below is a model USDA mission statement: to develop and disseminate agricultural information and research, identify and address concrete public health, and satisfy threats directly connected to food and agriculture, and remove both unjustified foreign trade barriers for U.S. goods and domestic government barriers that undermine access to safe and affordable food absent a compelling need, all based on the importance of sound science, personal freedom, private property, the rule of law, and service to all Americans. Overview. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed into law the legislation that created the USDA. The department had a very narrow mission focused on the dissemination of information connected to agriculture and to procure, propagate, and distribute among the people new valuable seeds and plants. During the last 160 years, the scope of the USDA's work has expanded well beyond that narrow mission and well beyond agriculture itself. In addition to being a distributor of farm subsidies, the USDA runs the food stamp program and other food-related welfare programs and covers issues including conservation, biofuels, forestry, and rural programs. Based on the USDA's fiscal year 2023 budget summary, outlays are estimated at $261 billion, $221 billion for mandatory programs, and $39 billion for discretionary programs. These outlays are broken down as follows: nutrition assistance, 70%, farm conservation and commodity programs, 14%, all other, which includes rural development, research, food safety, marketing and regulatory and departmental management, 11%, and forestry, 5%. The USDA has provided a summary of its size, explaining today USDA is comprised of 29 agencies organized under 8 mission areas and 16 staff offices, with nearly 100,000 employees serving the American people at more than 6,000 locations across the country and abroad. Major priority issues and specific recommendations. For an incoming administration, there are numerous issues that should be addressed at the USDA. This chapter identifies and discusses many of the important issues. The initial issues discussed should be priority issues for the next administration. Defend American agriculture. It is deeply unfortunate that the first issue identified must be a willingness of the incoming administration to defend American agriculture. but this is precisely what the top priority for that administration should be. As previously discussed, the Biden administration is seeking to use the federal government to transform the American food system. The USDA website explains the U.S. Department of Agriculture, alongside Biden-Harris administration, leadership, and the people of this country, has embarked on another historic journey, transforming the food system as we know it from farm to fork and at every stage along the supply chain. The federal government does not need to transform the food system or develop a national plan to intervene across the supply chain. Instead, it should respect American farmers, truckers, and everyone who makes the food supply chain so resilient and successful. One of the most important lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic was how critical it is to remove barriers in the food supply chain, not to increase them. The Biden administration's centrally planned transformational effort minimizes the importance of efficient agricultural production and instead places issues such as climate change and equity front and center. The USDA's strategic plan, fiscal years 2022 through 2026, identifies 6 strategic goals, the first 3 of which focus on issues such as climate change, renewable energy, and systemic racism. In the Secretary of Agriculture's message, there's only one mention of affordable food and nothing about efficient production and the incredible innovation and respect for the environment that already exists within the agricultural community. The Biden administration, USDA, strongly supported the recent United Nations, UN, Food System Summit, according to the USDA. The stated goal of the Food System Summit was to transform the way the world produces, consumes, and thinks about foods within the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and to meet the challenges of poverty, food security, malnutrition, population growth, climate change, and natural resource degradation. Not unlike those who oppose reliable and affordable energy production, there is a disdain, especially by some on the left, for American agriculture and the food system. The Biden administration vision of a federal government developing a plan that fixes agriculture and focuses on issues secondary to food production is very disturbing. A recent USDA created program captures both the disrespect for American farmers and the Biden administration's effort to dictate agricultural practices. The USDA explained that it was concerned with farmers not transitioning to organic farming and therefore announced that it will dedicate $300 million to induce farmers to adopt organic farming. There was no recognition that farmers know how to farm better than DC politicians or that organic food is expensive and land intensive. The Biden administration has also been pushing so-called climate smart agricultural practices, which received additional support in the Partisan Inflation Reduction Act. American agriculture should not need defending. According to the USDA's latest data, farm output nearly tripled, a 175% increase from 1948 to 2019, while the amount of land farmed decreased. In fact, as farm output increased by 175%, all agricultural inputs increased by only 4%. In 2021, despite high food prices, a major problem in regressive, American consumers spend an average of about 10% of their personal disposable income on food, which is close to historic lows. For decades, this share has been in decline. America's farmers efficiently produce food using fewer resources, making it possible for food to be affordable. This reality is not only something that should be defended, but also touted as a prime example of what makes American agriculture so successful. The connection between efficiency and affordability seems lost in the Biden administration's effort to transform the food system. Recommendations: proactively defend the agriculture. From the outset, Nett's administration should denounce efforts to place ancillary issues like climate change ahead of food productivity and affordability when it comes to agriculture. remove the U.S. from any association with UN and other efforts to push sustainable development schemes connected to food production, defend American agriculture, and advance the critical importance of efficient and innovative food production, especially to advance safe and affordable food. Number three, stress that ideal policies should remove obstacles imposed on American farmers and individuals across the food supply chain so that they can meet the food needs of Americans. Number four, clarify the critical importance of efficiency to food affordability and why a failure to recognize this fact especially hurts low income households who spend a disproportionate share of after tax income on food compared to higher income households. To accomplish these objectives, a new administration should announce its principles through an executive order. The USDA should remove all references to transforming the food system on its website, and other department disseminated material, and it should expressly and regularly communicate the principles informing the objectives listed above, as well as promoted through these principles through legislative efforts. The USDA should also carefully review existing efforts that involve inappropriately imposing its preferred agricultural practices onto farmers. Address the abuse of CCC discretionary authority. With the exception of federal crop insurance, the Commodity Credit Corporation, CCC, is generally the means by which agriculturally related farm bill programs are funded. The CCC is a funding mechanism which, in simple terms, has $30 billion a year at its disposal. Section 5 of the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act gives the Secretary of Agriculture broad discretionary authority to spend unused CCC money. However, in general, past agricultural secretaries have not used this power to in any meaningful extent. This changed dramatically during the Trump administration when this discretionary authority was used to fund $28 billion in trade aid to farmers, consistently primarily of the Market Facilitation Program. In 2020, this authority was used for $20.5 billion in food purchases and income subsidies in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, critics warned that this use of the CCC, which in effect created a USDA slush fund, would lead future administrations to abuse the CCC, such as by pushing climate change policies. Predictably, this is precisely what the Biden administration has done, using the discretionary authority to create programs out of whole cloth, arguably without statutory authority, for what it refers to as climate-smart agricultural practices. The merits of the various programs funded through the CCC discretionary authority is not the focus of this discussion. The major problem is that the Secretary of Agriculture is empowered to use a slush fund. Billions of dollars are being used for programs that Congress never envisioned or intended. Concern about this type of abuse is not new. In fact, from 2012 to 2017, Congress expressly limited the Agricultural Secretary's discretionary spending authority under the Charter Act. And this was before the recent massive discretionary CCC spending occurred. The use of discretionary power is a separation of powers problem, with Congress abrogating its spending power. This power is ripe for abuse, as could be expected with any slush fund, and it is a possible way to get around the Farm Bill process to achieve policy goals not secured during the legislative process. The next administration should refrain from using Section 5 discretionary authority. The USDA addressed this abuse on its own by following the lead of most administrations in not using this discretionary authority. Number two, promote legislative fixes to address abuse. Ideally, Congress will repeal the Secretary's discretionary authority under Section 5 of the Charter Act. There is no reason to maintain such authority. If Congress needs to spend money to assist farmers, it has legislative tools, including the Farm Bill and the annual appropriations process, to do so in a timely fashion. While not an ideal solution, Congress could also amend the Charter Act to require prior congressional approval through duly enacted legislation before any money is spent. At a minimum, Congress should amend the Charter Act to, number one, limit spending to directly help farmers and ranchers address issues due to unforeseen events not already covered by existing programs and that constitutes genuine emergencies that must be addressed immediately. Number two, prohibit the CCC from being used to assist parties beyond farmers and ranchers. Number three, clarify that spending is only to address problems that are temporary in nature and ensure that funding is targeted to address such problems. Number four, tighten the discretion within Section 5 and identify ways for improper application of the Charter Act to be challenged in court. Reform farm subsidies. Too often, agricultural policy can become synonymous with farm subsidy policy. This is unfortunate because making them synonymous fails to recognize that agricultural policy covers a wide range of issues, including issues that are outside the proper scope of the USDA, such as environmental regulation. However, there is no question that farm subsidies are an important issue within agricultural policy that should be addressed by any incoming administration. There are several principles that even subsidy supporters would likely agree upon, including the need to reduce market distortions. Subsidies should not influence planting decisions, discourage proper risk management and innovation, incentivize planting on environmentally sensitive land, or create barriers to entry for new farmers. Farm subsidies can lead to these market distortions, and therefore it would hardly be controversial to ensure that any subsidy scheme should be designed to avoid such problems. The overall goal should be to eliminate subsidy dependence. Despite what might be conventional wisdom, many farmers receive few to no subsidies, with most subsidies going to only a handful of commodities. According to the Congressional Research Service, CRS, from 2014 to 2016, 94% of farm program support went to just 6 commodities: corn, cotton, peanuts, rice, soybeans, and wheat. That together account for only 28% of farm receipts. Although many farmers do not receive much in the way of subsidies, especially those in the areas of livestock and specialty crops, fruit, vegetable, and nuts, there's still a significant number of farmers growing row crops like corn and cotton that do receive significant farm subsidies. The primary subsidy programs include the Agricultural Risk Coverage, ARC program, the Price Loss Coverage, PLC program, and the Federal Crop Insurance Program. Farmers can participate on a crop-by-crop basis in the ARC program or the PLC program. These programs cover about 20 different crops. The ARC program protects farmers from what are referred to as shallow losses, providing payments when their actual revenues fall below 86% of the expected revenues for their crops. The PLC program provides payments to farmers when commodity prices fall below a fixed and statutorily established reference price. The Federal Crop Insurance Program is broader in scope than ARC and PLC, and in crop year 2019 cover 124 commodities. Farmers pay a portion of a premium to participate in the program. Taxpayers on average pay about 60% of the premium. As explained by CRS, revenue protection was the most frequently purchased policy type in 2019, accounting for about almost 70% of policies purchased. While there are certainly other subsidy programs besides ARC, PLC, and federal crop insurance, one program that deserves special mention is the Federal Sugar Program. This program, unlike most other subsidy programs, intentionally tries to restrict supply and thereby drives up prices. The program costs consumers as much as $3.7 billion a year. When it comes to reforming subsidy programs, the next administration will primarily have to look to legislative solutions. the next administration should champion legislation that would, number one, repeal the federal sugar program. The federal government should not be in the central planning business, and the sugar program is a prime example of harmful central planning. Its very purpose is to limit the sugar supply in order to increase prices. The program has a regressive effect since lower income households spend more of their money to meet food needs compared to higher income households. Number two, ideally repeal the ARC and PLC programs. Farmers eligible to participate in ARC or PLC are generally able to purchase federal crop insurance, policies that protect against shortfalls in expected revenue, whether caused by lower prices or smarter harvest. The ARC program is especially egregious because farmers are being protected from shallow losses, which is another way of saying minor dips in expected revenue. This is hardly consistent with the concept of providing a safety net to help farmers when they fall on hard times. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, in one of its options to reduce the federal deficit, has once again identified repealing all Title I farm programs, including ARC, PLC, and the Federal Sugar Program. Stop paying farmers twice for price and revenue losses during the same year. Farmers can receive support from the ARC or PLC programs and the Federal Crop Insurance Program to cover price declines and revenue shortfalls during the same year. Congress should prohibit this duplication by prohibiting farmers from receiving an ARC or PLC payment the same year they receive a crop insurance indemnity. Reduce the premium subsidy rate for crop insurance. On average, taxpayers cover about 60% of the premium cost for policies purchased in the federal crop insurance program. One of the most widely supported and bipartisan policy reforms is to reduce the premium subsidy that taxpayers are forced to pay. At a minimum, taxpayers should not pay more than 50% of the premium. After all, taxpayers should not have to pay more than the farmers who benefit from the crop insurance policies. CBO has found that reducing the premium subsidy to 47% will save $8.1 billion over 10 years and have little impact on crop insurance participation or on the number of covered acres. In that analysis, there will be a reduction in insured acres of just 0.5%, and only 1.5% of acres would have lower coverage levels. This reform is basically all benefit with little to no cost. In its recently released report, identifying options to reduce the federal deficit, CBO found that reducing the premium subsidy to 40% would save $20.9 billion over 10 years. Beyond these legislative reforms, the next administration should, number one, communicate to Congress the necessity of transparency and a genuine reform process. The White House and the USDA should make it clear that the Farm Bill process, including reform of farm subsidies, must be conducted through an open process with time for markup and the opportunity for changes to be made outside the Agriculture Committee process. The Farm Bill too often is developed behind closed doors and without any chance for real reform. The White House, given the power of the bully pulpit, must demand a genuine reform process and express unwavering support for a USDA that shapes a safety net that considers the interests of farmers, while also remembering the interests of taxpayers and consumers. Any safety net for farmers should be a true safety net, one that helps farmers when they have experienced serious unforeseen losses, preferably when there has been a disaster or unforeseen natural event causing damage, and that exists to help them in unusual situations. Separate the agricultural provisions of the Farm Bill from the nutrition provisions. To have genuine reform and proper consideration of the issues, agricultural programs should be considered in separate legislation, distinct from food stamps and the nutrition part of the Farm Bill, and reauthorization of such programs should be fixed on different timelines to ensure the separation. Agricultural and nutritional programs, which are distinct from each other, have been combined together for political reasons, something which is readily admitted by proponents of this log rolling. When it comes to American agriculture and welfare programs, they deserve sound policy debates, not political tactics at the expense of thoughtful discourse. Move the work of the Food and Nutrition Service. The USDA implements many means tested federal support programs, including the largest food assistance program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, also known as food stamps, and the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, WIC food program. The Food and Nutritional Service, FNS, oversees these programs and other food and nutrition programs, including the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, which handles the USDA's work on the dietary guidelines for Americans, dietary guidelines. Food nutrition programs include SNAP, WIC, the National School Lunch Program, NSLP, the School Breakfast Program, SBP, the Child and Adult Food Care Program, the Nutrition Program for the Elderly, Nutrition Service Incentives, the Summer Food Service Program, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, the Temporary Emergency Food Program, the Farmers Market Nutritional Program, and the Special Milk Program. The next administration should move the USDA food and nutrition programs to the Department of Health and Human Services. There are more than 89 current means tested welfare programs, and total means tested spending has been estimated to surpass $1.2 trillion between federal and state resources. Because means tested federal programs are siloed and administered in separate agencies, the effectiveness and size of the welfare state remains largely hidden. There are means tested food support programs in the USDA, specifically FNS, whereas most means tested programs are at the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. All means tested anti-poverty programs should be overseen by one department, specifically HHS, which handles most welfare programs. Reform SNAP. Ostensibly, SNAP sends money through electronic benefit transfer, EBT cards, to help low-income individuals buy food. It is the largest of the federal nutrition programs. Food stamps are designed to be supplemented by other forms of income, which through paid employment or nonprofit support. SNAP serves 41.1 million individuals and an increase of 4.3 million people during the Biden years. In 2020, the food stamp program cost $79.1 billion. That number continued to rise by 2022. Outlays hit $119.5 billion. The next administration should re-implement work requirements. The statutory language covering food stamps allows states to waive work requirements that otherwise apply to work-capable individuals. That is, adult beneficiaries between the ages of 18 and 50 who are not disabled and do not have any children or dependents in the home. Even in a strong economy, work expectations are fairly limited. Individuals who are work capable and without dependents are required to work or prepare for work for 20 hours per week. The work requirements are then implemented unless the state requests a waiver from the USDA's Food and Nutrition Services. Waivers from statutory work requirements can be approved in two instances: an unemployment rate of more than 10% or a lack of sufficient jobs. The Trump administration bolstered USDA work expectations in the food stamp program. In February 2019, FNS issued a modest regulatory change that applied only to be able-bodied individuals without dependents, beneficiaries aged 18 to 49, not elderly or disabled, who did not have children or other dependents in the home, ABAWD. The FNS rule changed when the state could receive a waiver from implementing the ABAWD work requirement. Under the new rule, in order to waive the work requirement, The state's unemployment rate had to be above 6% for more than 24 months. The rule also defined area in such a way that states would be unable to combine non-contiguous counties in order to maximize their waivers. Of the more than 40 million food stamp beneficiaries, the Trump rule would have applied only to 688,000 individuals in fiscal year 2021. The Trump reform was scheduled to go into effect, but a DC District Court federal judge enjoined the rule. The USDA filed an appeal in late December 2020, but the Biden administration withdrew from defending the challenge and the rule was never implemented. Beyond the able-bodied work requirement, FNS should implement better regulations to clarify options for states to implement the general work requirement. This requirement is an option states can apply to work-capable beneficiaries aged 16 to 59. If beneficiaries' work hours are below 30 hours a week, states can implement the general work requirements to oblige beneficiaries to register for work or participate in SNAP employment and training or workfare assigned by the state SNAP agency. Increased clarity for states would include items like states being required to offer employment and training spots for those that request them, not simply budgeting for every currently enrolled able-bodied adult. Reform broad-based categorically eligibility. Federal law permits states to enroll individuals in food stamps if they receive a benefit from another program, such as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF program. However, under an administrative option in TANF called Broad-Based Categorically Eligibility, BBCE benefit, is defined so broadly that it includes simply receiving distributed pamphlets and 1-800 numbers. This definition, with its low thresholds to trigger a benefit, allows individuals to bypass eligibility limits, particularly the asset requirement. How much the applicant has in resources, such as bank accounts or property. Adopting the BBCE option has even allowed millionaires to enroll in the food stamp program. The Trump administration proposed to close the loophole with a rule to increase program integrity and reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. The regulation was not finalized before the end of the Trump administration. Reevaluate the Thrifty Food Plan. In a dramatic overreach, the Biden administration unilaterally increased food stamp benefits by at least 23% in October 2021. Though an update to the Thrifty Food Plan, in which the USDA analyzes a basket of foods intended to provide a nutritious diet, the USDA increased food stamp outlays by between $250 billion and $300 billion over 10 years. Although the 2018 Farm Bill instructed FNS to update the Thrifty Food Plan by 2023, and every 5 years thereafter, every previous Thrifty Food Plan has been always cost neutral, just an inflation update, exactly what CBO estimated as cost of the 2018 Farm Bill. The Biden administration may have skirted regulations and congressional authority to increase the overall cost of the program. In fact, Senate and House Republicans requested that the Governmental Accountability Office investigate the legal authorities and process that the USDA undertook to arrive at such an unprecedented increase. Eliminate the heat and eat loophole. States can artificially boost a household's food stamp benefit by using the heat and eat loophole. The amount of food stamps a household receives is based on its countable income minus certain deductions. Households that receive benefits from the Low Income Heat and Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, are eligible for a larger utility deduction. In order to make households eligible for the higher deduction and thus for greater food stamp benefits, states have distributed LIHEAP checks for amounts as small as $1 to food stamp recipients. The 2014 Farm Bill tightened this loophole by requiring that a household must receive more than $20 annually in LIHEAP payments to be eligible for the larger utility deduction and subsequently higher food stamp benefits. Nonetheless, states continue to inflate their standard utility allowances. Under the Trump administration, the USDA proposed a rule, which was not finalized, that would have standardized the utility allowance. Reform the WIC. Turning to WIC, this program distributes money through EBT cards to help low-income women, infants, children, and under 6 purchase nutrition-rich foods and nutrition into education, including breastfeeding support. As of August 2022, approximately 6.3 million people participated in WIC each month to purchase food. In 2021, WIC outlays were $5 billion. The next administration should, number one, reform the state voucher system. State agencies control the WIC costs by approving only one brand of infant formula through competitive bidding for infant formula rebate contracts. Because 50% of baby formula is purchased through the federal WIC program, it is vital that regulation for these competitive bidding contracts does not unintentionally create monopolies. Number two, reevaluate excessive regulation. As for baby formula regulations, labeling regulations and regulations that unnecessarily delay the manufacture and sale of baby formula should be reevaluated. During the Biden administration, there have been devastating baby formula shortages. Return to the original purpose of school meals. Federal meal programs for K-12 students were created to provide food to children from low-income families while at school. Today, however, federal school meals increasingly resemble entitlement programs that have strayed far from their original objective and represent an example of the ever-expanding federal footprint in local school operations. The NSLP and SBP are the two largest K-12 meal programs provided by federal taxpayer money. The NSLP, launched in 1946, and SBP in 1966, such as options specifically for children in poverty. During the COVID-19 pandemic, federal policymakers temporarily expanded access to school meal programs, but some lawmakers and federal officials have now proposed making this expansion permanent. Yet, even before the pandemic, research found that federal officials had already expanded these programs to serve children from upper-income homes, and these programs are rife with improper payments and inefficiencies. Heritage Foundation research from 2019 found that after the enactment of the Community Eligibility Provision, CEP, in 2010, the share of students from middle and upper income homes receiving free meals in states that participated in CEP doubled, and in some cases tripled, all in a program meant for children from families with incomes at or below 185% of the federal poverty line. Children from homes at or below 130% of the federal poverty line are eligible for free lunches, while students from families at or below 185% of poverty are eligible for reduced price lunches. Under CEP, if 40% of students in a school or school district are eligible for federal meals, all students in that school district can receive free meals. However, the USDA had taken it even further, improperly interpreting the law to allow a subset of schools within a district to be grouped together to reach the 40% threshold. As a result, a school with 0 low-income students could be grouped together with schools with high levels of low-income students. And as a result, all the students in the schools within that group, even schools without a single low-income student, can receive free federal meals. Schools can direct resources meant for students in poverty to children from wealthier families. Furthermore, the NSLP and SBP are among the most inaccurate federal programs, according to payment.accuracy.gov, a project of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and the Office of the Inspector of the Inspector General. Before federal auditors reduced the rigor of annual reporting requirements in 2018, the NSLP had wasted nearly $2 billion in taxpayer resources through payments provided to ineligible recipients. Even after the auditing changes, which the U.S. Government Accountability Office said results in the USDA not regularly assessing the program fraud risk, the NSLP wasted nearly $500 million in fiscal year 2021. The SBP now wastes nearly $200 million annually. Despite the ongoing effort to expand school meals under CEP and the evidence of waste and inefficiency, left of center members of Congress and President Biden's administration have nonetheless proposed further expansions to extend federal school meals to include every K-12 student, regardless of need. The administration recently proposed expanding federal school meal programs offering during the school year to be offered during the summer as part of the American Families Plan, and also proposed expanding CEP. Other federal officials, including Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, have in recent years proposed expanding the NSLP to all students. To serve students in need and prevent the misuse of taxpayer money, the next administration should focus on students in need and reject efforts to transform federal school meals into an entitlement program. Specifically, the next administration should, number one, promulgate a rule properly interpreting CEP. The USDA should issue a rule that clarifies that only an individual school or school district as a whole, not a subset of schools within a district, must meet the 40% criteria to be eligible for CEP. Education officials should be prohibited from grouping schools together. Number two, work with lawmakers to eliminate CEP. The NSLP and SBP should be directed to serve children in need, not become an entitlement for students from middle and upper income homes. Congress should eliminate CEP. Furthermore, the USDA should not provide meals to students during the summer unless students are taking summer school classes. Currently, students can get meals from schools even if they're not in summer school, which has, in effect, turned school meals into a federal catering program. Number three, restore programs to their original intent and reject efforts to create universal free school meals. The USDA should work with lawmakers to restore NSLP and SBP to their original goal of providing food to K through 12 students who otherwise would not have food to eat while at school. Federal school meals should be focused on children in need, and any efforts to expand student eligibility for school meals to include all K through 12 students should be soundly rejected. Such expansion would allow an inefficient, wasteful program to grow, magnifying the amount of wasted taxpayer resources. Reform conservation programs. Farmers in general are excellent stewards of the land. If not for moral or ethical considerations, then out of self-interest to make sure their land and by extension their livelihoods remain intact. Farmers are often called the original conservationists. When evaluating federal conservation programs, it is important to remember the importance of the land to farmers. In terms of USDA federal conservation programs, both the USDA's Farm Service Agency, FSA, and Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, oversee numerous programs. As a general matter, the next administration should ensure that these programs address genuine and specific environmental concerns with a focus on currently existing environmental problems, not those that are speculative in nature. These conservation programs should have clearly identifiable goals, with the success or failure of these programs being directly measurable. Any assistance to farmers to take specific actions should not be provided unless the assistance was directly and clearly helped to address the specific environmental problem. Further, any assistance to encourage farmers to engage in certain practices should only be provided if farmers would not have adopted the practices in the first place. There are specific issues that the next administration should address. The Conservation Reserve Program, which is run by FSA, pays farmers to not farm some of their land. This program has recently received attention as agricultural groups rightfully seek to farm without penalty voluntarily idled land in light of the consequences of food prices of Russia invading Ukraine. There is also a need to reform USDA's conservation easements. These easements are a powerful tool to incentivize long term preservation of ecosystems while still allowing farmers to benefit economically. However, when farmers and ranchers sign conservation easements with the USDA, they can be enforced in perpetuity. Future generations, be they the descendants of the landowner or new residents, are bound by those conditions. Ecosystems and topography naturally change over time, but with legislative change, easements requirements will not. The next administration should champion the elimination of the Conservation Reserve Program. Farmers should not be paid in such a sweeping way not to farm their land. If there's a desire to ensure that extremely sensitive land is not farmed, this should be addressed through targeted efforts that are clearly connected to addressing a specific and concrete environmental harm. The USDA should work with Congress to eliminate this overbroad program. Number two, reformed NRCS wetlands and erodible land compliance and appeals. Problematic NRCS overreach should be avoided entirely by removing its authority to prescribe specific practices on a particular farm operation in order to ensure continued eligibility to practice in USDA farm programs, and to require instead that each farm, as a function of eligibility, must have created a general best practices plan. Such a plan could be approved by the local county soil and water conservation district, SWCD. The local SWCD commissioners are elected by their peers in each respective county and are better suited than the NRCS to provide guidance for farm operations in their respective jurisdictions. At a minimum, a new administration should support legislation to divest more power to the states and possibly SWCDs regarding erodible land and wetlands conservation. Reform easements. The new administration should, to the extent authorized by law, limit the use of permanent easements and collaborate with lawmakers to prohibit the USDA from creating new permanent easements. Other major issues and specific recommendations, although the following issues have not been listed as priority, these issues are still extremely important and the next administration should address them. Only meat and poultry from federal inspected facilities can be sold in interstate commerce. Even meat and poultry from USDA approved state inspected facilities may only be sold in interstate commerce with limited exceptions. This is despite the fact that states with USDA approved inspection programs must meet and enforce requirements that are at least equal to those imposed under the Federal Meat and Poultry Products Inspection Acts and the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act of 1978. This is an unnecessary regulatory barrier that makes it difficult to get meat and poultry into interstate commerce to create more options for customers and farmers. Legislation entitled the New Markets for State Inspected Meat and Poultry Act of 2021 would help to remove this obstacle. The next administration should, number one, promote legislation that would allow state inspected meat to be sold in interstate commerce. These barriers to the sale of meat and poultry from USDA approved state inspected facilities should be removed. Number two, eliminate or reform marketing orders and checkoff programs. Marketing orders and checkoff programs for agricultural commodities are similar in many ways. They both allow private actors within the industry to collaborate with the federal government to compel other competitors within the industry to fund the respective marketing order or checkoff program. There are currently 22 checkoff programs, and they focus on research and promotion of commodities such as beef and eggs. Marketing orders cover research and promotion, but also cover issues such as quality regulations and volume controls. The latter issue, volume controls, is a means to restrict supply, which drives up prices for consumers. Fortunately, there are few active volume controls. Marketing orders and checkoff programs are some of the most egregious programs run by the USDA. There are, in fact, a tax, a means to compel speech, and government-based cartels. Instead of getting private cooperation, they are tools for industry actors to work with government to force cooperation. The next administration should, number one, reduce the number and scope of marketing orders and checkoff programs. The USDA should reject any new requests for marketing orders and checkoff programs to the extent authorized by law, and eliminate existing programs when possible. While the programs work differently, there are often petition processes in other ways that make it difficult for affected parties to get rid of the marketing orders and checkoff programs. And the USDA itself may not even be required to honor requests to terminate a program. The USDA should make the process easier. Further, the USDA should reject any effort to bring back volume controls to limit supplies of commodities. Work with Congress to eliminate marketing orders and checkoff programs. These programs should be eliminated, and if industry actors want to collaborate, they should do so through private means, not using the government to compel cooperation. Bullet point, promote legislation that would require regular votes. There should be regular voting for parties subject to checkoff programs and marketing orders. For example, the voting should occur at least every 5 years to determine whether a marketing order or checkoff program should continue. The USDA should be required to honor the results of such a vote. Thorough regular voting, parties can demonstrate their support for a marketing order or checkoff program and ensure that those administering them will be held accountable. Focus on trade policy, not trade promotion. The USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, FAS, covers numerous issues, including trade policy, which is a reference to removing trade barriers, among other things, to ensure an environment conducive to trade. It also covers trade promotion. This includes programs like the Market Access Program that subsidizes trade associations, businesses, and other private entities to market and promote their products overseas. We're on page 306 of the download, page 339 of 922 of the PDF of the Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership, Department of Agriculture. Page 307. On the download, page 340 of 922. FAS should play a proactive and leading role to help open up markets for American farmers and ranchers. These are numerous barriers, such as sanitary and phytosanitary measures, blocking American agricultural products from gaining access to foreign markets. However, FAS should not help businesses and industries promote their exports, something these businesses and industries can and should do on their own. The next administration should push legislation to repeal export promotion programs. The USDA should work with Congress to repeal market development programs like the Market Access Program and similar programs. Remove obstacles for agricultural biotechnology. Innovation is critical to agricultural production and the ability to meet future needs. The next administration should embrace innovation and technology, not hinder its use, especially because of scare tactics that ignore sound science. One of the key innovations in agriculture is genetic engineering. According to the USDA, currently over 90% of US corn, upland cotton, and soybeans are produced using genetically engineer varieties. Despite the importance of agricultural biotechnology, in 2016, Congress passed a federal mandate to label genetically engineered food. This legislation was arguably just a means to try to provide a negative connotation to GE food. There are other challenges as well for agricultural biotechnology. For example, Mexico plans to ban the importation of U.S. genetically modified of of for example, Mexico plans to ban the importation of U.S. genetically modified yellow corn. The next administration should counter scare tactics and remove obstacles. The USDA should strongly counter scare tactics regarding agricultural biotechnology and adopt policies to remove unnecessary barriers to approvals and the adoption of biotechnology. Number two, repeal the federal labeling mandate. The USDA should work with Congress to repeal the federal labeling law while maintaining federal preemption and stress that voluntary labeling is allowed. Number three, use all tools available to remove improper trade barriers against agricultural biotechnology. The USDA should work closely with the Office of United States Trade Representative to remove improper barriers imposed by other countries to block U.S. agricultural goods. Reform Forest Service wildfire management. The United States Forest Service is one of 4 federal government land management agencies that administers 606 million acres, or 95% of the 640 million acres of surface land area managed by the federal government. Located within the USDA, Forest Service manages the National Forest System, which is comprised of 193 million acres. As explained by the USDA's Forest Service mission is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. The Forest Service should focus on proactive management of the forest and grasslands that does not depend heavily on burning. There should be resilient forests and grasslands in the wake of management actions. Wildfires have become a primary vegetation management regime for natural forests and grasslands. Recognizing the need for vegetation management, the Forest Service has adopted civiculture using unplanned fire, such as unplanned human-caused fires, to otherwise accomplish vegetation management. The Forest Service should instead be focusing on addressing the precipitous annual amassing of biomass in the national forests that drive the behavior of wildfires. By thinning trees, removing live fuels and dead woods, and taking over preventative steps, the Forest Service can help to minimize the consequences of wildfires. Increasing timber sales could also play an important role in the effort to change the behavior of wildfire because there would be less biomass. Timber sales and timber harvested in public forests dropped precipitously in the early 1990s and still remain very low. For example, in 1988, the volume of timber sold and harvested by volume was about 11 billion and 12.6 billion board feet, BBF, respectively. In 2021, timber sold was 2.8 BBF and timber harvested was 2.4 BBF. In 2018, President Donald Trump issued Executive Order 13855 to, among other things, promote active management of forests and reduce wildfire risks. The executive order stated active management of vegetation is needed to treat these dangerous conditions on federal lands, but is often delayed due to challenges associated with regulatory analysis and current consultation requirements. It further explained the need to reduce regulatory obstacles to fuel reduction in forests created by the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act. The next administration should champion executive action consistent with law and proactive legislation to reduce wildfires. This would involve embracing Executive Order 13855, building upon it and working with lawmakers to promote active management of vegetation, reduce regulatory obstacles to reducing fuel buildup, and increase timber sales. Number two, eliminate or reform the dietary guidelines. The USDA, in collaboration with HHS, publishes the dietary guidelines every 5 years. For more than 40 years, the federal government has been releasing dietary guidelines, and during this time, there has been constant controversy due to questionable recommendations and claims regarding the politicization of the process. In the 2015 dietary guidelines process, the influential Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee veered off mission and attempted to persuade the USDA and HHS to adopt nutritional advice that focused not just on human health, but the health of the planet. Issues such as climate change and sustainability infiltrated the process. Fortunately, the 2020 process did not get diverted in this manner. However, the dietary guidelines remain a potential tool to influence dietary choices to achieve objectives unrelated to the nutritional and dietary well-being of Americans. There is no shortage of private sector dietary advice for the public, and nutrition and dietary choices are best left to individuals to address their personal needs. This works including this includes working with their own health professionals. As it is, there's constantly changing advice provided by the government with insufficient qualifications on the advice oversimplification up to the point of miscommunicating important points, questionable use of science, and potential political influence. The dietary guidelines have a major impact because they not only can influence how private health providers offer nutritional advice, but they also inform federal programs. School meals are required to be consistent with the guidelines. The next administration should work with lawmakers to repeal the dietary guidelines. USDA should help lead an effort to repeal the dietary guidelines. Number two, minimally, the next administration should reform the dietary guidelines. The USDA with HHS should develop a more transparent process that properly considers the underlying science and does not overstate its findings. It should also ensure that the dietary guidelines focus on nutritional issues and do not veer off mission by focusing on unrelated issues, such as the environment, that have nothing to do with nutritional advice. In fact, if environmental concerns supersede or water down recommendations for human nutritional advice, the public would be receiving misleading health information. The USDA, working with lawmakers, should codify these reforms into law. Organizational issues. Based on the recommended reforms identified as ideal solutions, the USDA would look different in many respects. One of the biggest changes would be a USDA that is not focused on welfare, but given that means-tested welfare programs will be moved to HHS. The Food and Nutrition Service that administers the food and nutrition programs will be eliminated. The Farm Service Agency, which administers many of the farm subsidy programs, which would be significantly smaller in size if the ideal farm subsidy reforms were adopted. Most important, a conservative USDA, as envisioned, would not be used as a governmental tool to transform the nation's food system, but instead would respect the importance of efficient agricultural production and ensure that the government does not hinder farmers and ranchers from producing an abundant supply of safe and affordable food. For a conservative USDA to become a reality and for it to stay on course with the mission as outlined, the White House must strongly support these reforms and install strong USDA leaders. These individuals almost certainly will be faced with opposition from some in the agricultural community who would fight changing subsidies in any fashion, although many of the reforms would likely be embraced by those in agriculture. There will be strong opposition from environmental groups and others who want the federal government to transform American agriculture to meet their ideological objectives. Finally, there will be opposition from left of center groups who do not want to reform SNAP and would expand welfare and dependency, such as thorough universal free school meals as opposed to reducing dependency. Reducing the scope of government and promoting individual freedom may not always be easy, but it is something that conservatives regularly should strive for. The listed reforms to the U.S. Department of Agriculture would help to accomplish these objectives and are well worth fighting for to achieve a freer and more prosperous nation. Conclusion. This chapter started with a discussion of the incredible success of American farmers and American agriculture in general. This is how the chapter should close as well. Americans are blessed with an agricultural sector and a food system in general, which are worthy of incredible respect. Conservative USDA should appreciate this while recognizing that its role is to serve the interests of all Americans, not special interests. By being a champion of unleashing the potential of American agriculture, a conservative USDA would help to ensure a future with an abundant supply of safe and affordable food for individuals and families in the United States and across the globe. And that is the Department of Agriculture. So we're 2.5 hours in. Yay, look at us on page 343, of 922. And we're going to keep going and going because she's going to start on 313. What up, though, Detroit? But it's not going to pass by 313 as well. And we're going to take this all the way until right before 4:30. Then we're going to take an hour break. We're going to come back and go live again and give it our all. We're trying to get to page 922. Adriane Mayes, AI genius, has so many ideas. Thank you so much for the potential sponsors that have reached out. Thank you so much for we got to finish first, right? So I do want to say thank you so much for just the support, the comments, the idea, the random acts of kindness. And we're going to get it together in regards to how to get into the community. Simple and easy. Just go to cctwecaremi.com/ just go there and go to join the community. And it's simple and easy. Put your name, address, your name, email, and phone number in. Join the whole community of the Detroit ChatGPT revolution. Come on, I'm the captain. And so I'm guiding you along the way. So we're here in part 7. We're going to go for another hour. And leave in the comments one way that you can actually share a random act of kindness and let people know how about this Project 2025, good or bad, pros and cons. What is Project 2025? How will Project 2025 affect you? Is Project 2025 tied to Donald Trump and his administration? These are the questions that you want to ask and you want to get answers and get direction. But before you get any of those answers, you got to read. And so reading and some of these tools that are provided online for free, such as this Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership, it seems intimidating. 900 pages wouldn't be something that anyone would want to read. But that's why Adriane is bespoke, billionaire in the making. I want to be the 1%, the one that can say that I did something that everyone else didn't do. So because I can take that knowledge base and I can utilize that and help people more. And so that's the things that I want to be with the wealth creation strategist, being unique and being bespoke. I don't like to be like everybody else. That's my problem. I think different. I'm there. And I thank God for Unica Gaines, my business partner, angel, best friend, 60 by design, Federal Reserve, 32. Because she rose with Adriane Mayes in her bespoke thinking. And I thank you for the support, for the grind on day 61 of the billionaire journey. Because when we meet Jeff Bezos, and Unica Gaines tells the story, and when we meet we're going to meet Mr. Beast. And when we meet that billionaire that's giving away all the passion and everything, Unica Gaines is going to give it to you straight. She's going to give it to you real. And the great thing is, I thank God that he's given me my own recorder of who's going to tell me the ups, the downs, and going to be able to give it to you straight because she doesn't lie. That's the beautiful thing about having a transparent, honest friend, Angel. Thank you, God, for Unica Gaines. So we're going to jump in. We're going to go for, like I said, another hour. And Department of Education, CCC, Because We Care Foundation, my business partner, Unica Gaines, we're celebrating 15 years. And this bespoke random act of kindness, reading this, is leading up to the launching of our Random Acts of Kindness event. So again, these are things that we believe in: is education, wealth creation, financial education, travel experiences, health and wellness, AI marketing education, and having our AI work and learning experience program and our Random Acts of Kindness and our holiday gifting programs and our work and learning experience for our AI growth programs with the Detroit ChatGPT revolution. I mean, we want to have structure in regards to growth and building our Random Acts of Kindness community with those that want to help and build each other. But you got to want to help and build yourself first. That billionaire is within. And it's going to take some assistance. Sometimes you might need support along the way, and that's okay. And that's what we're here for, is to provide these resources and tools so you're never alone. You're always in the game every single day of the grind of being the best you for that 24 hours. So again, having tools like this already in your toolbox of having the knowledge. I mean, if you're going through this grind with me on part 7, hey, you've done more than most people probably in the country and read this document. I mean, seriously, we're almost halfway there. And so, it's 922 pages. So when we get halfway there, it'll be around 460 pages. So you're doing something right now that most people wouldn't do, putting time into the future of what your nation is going to look like and re-engineering the education, employment, and retirement system. That's my commercial break. So let's get back to it. No fluff, no input, nothing like that. We're going to have the Project 2025 900-page mandate for leadership, picking it up on Chapter 11, Department of Education, Lindsay M. Burke. Mission. Federal education policy should be limited, and ultimately the Federal Department of Education should be eliminated. When power is exercised, it should empower students and families, not government. In our pluralistic society, families and students should be free to choose from a diverse set of school options and learning environments that best fit their needs. Our post-secondary institutions should also reflect such diversity, with room for not only traditional liberal arts schools and research universities, but also faith-based institutions, career schools, military academies, and lifelong learning programs. Elementary and secondary education policy should follow the path outlined by Milton Friedman in 1955, wherein education is publicly funded but education decisions are made by families. Ultimately, every parent should have the option to direct his or her child's share of education funding through an education savings account, ESA, funded overwhelmingly by state and local taxpayers, which would empower parents to choose a set of education options that meet their child's unique needs. States are eager to lead in K-12 education. For decades, they have acted independently of the federal government to pioneer a variety of constructive reforms in school choice programs. For example, in 2011, Arizona first piloted ESAs, which provide families roughly 90% of what the state would have spent on that child in public school to be used instead on education options such as private school, tuition, online courses, and tutoring. In 2022, Arizona expanded the program to be available to all families. The future of education, freedom, and reform in the states is bright and will shine brighter when regulation and red tape from Washington are eliminated. Federal money is inevitably accompanied by rules and regulations that keep the influx of funds from having much, if any, impact on student outcomes. It raises the cost of education without raising student achievement. To the extent that federal taxpayer dollars are used to fund education programs, those funds should be block granted to states without strings, eliminating the need for many federal and state bureaucrats. Eventually, policymaking and funding should take place at the state and local level closest to the affected families. As although student loans and grants should ultimately be restored to the private sector, or at the very least, the federal government should revisit its role as a guarantor rather than direct lender. Federal post secondary education investments should bolster economic growth, and recipient institutions should nourish academic freedom and embrace intellectual diversity. That has not, however, been the track record of federal higher education policy or of the many institutions of higher education that are hostile to free expression, open academic inquiry, and American exceptionalism. Federal post-secondary policy should be more than massive, inefficient, and open-ended subsidies to traditional colleges and universities. It should be rebalanced to focus far more on bolstering the workforce skills of Americans who have no interest in pursuing a four-year academic degree. It should reflect a fuller picture of learning after high school, placing apprenticeship programs of all types in career and technical education on an even playing field with degrees from college and universities, rather than continuing to buttress a higher education system captured by woke diversicrats and the de facto monopoly enforced by the federal accreditation cartel. Federal post-secondary education policy should prepare students for jobs in a dynamic economy, nurture institutional diversity, and expose schools to greater market focus. Overview. For most of our history, the federal government played a minor role in education. Then, over a 14-month period beginning in 1964, Congress planted the seeds for what would become the U.S. Department of Education, ED, or the department. In July of that year, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964, after Congress reached a consensus that the mistreatment of Black Americans was no longer tolerable and merited a federal response. In the case of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, ESEA, and the Higher Education Act of 1965, HEA, Congress sought to improve educational outcomes for disadvantaged students by providing additional compensatory funding for low-income children and lower-income college students. Spending on ESEA and the HEA, part of Johnson's war on poverty, grew exponentially in the years that followed. By fiscal year 2022, ESEA programs received $27.7 billion in appropriations, in addition to $190 billion that came through the pandemic's elementary and secondary schools emergency relief funds, ESSER, which relied on ESEA formulas. The same year, the department spent more than $2 billion just to administer Title IV of the HEA, which authorizes federal student loans and Pell Grants. It provided $22.5 billion in Pell Grants, and it oversaw outlays of close to $100 billion in direct student loans. Since 1965, Congress has continued to layer on dozens of new laws and programs as federal solutions to myriad education problems. In 1973, it passed the Rehabilitation Act, and in 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, to address educational neglect of students with disabilities. In 2002, it created the Institute for Educational Service to consolidate education data collection and fund research. Congress has enacted a series of Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Acts, including Perkins v. in 2018. Congress could have and once did distribute management of federal education programs outside of a single department. But for those interested in expanding federal funding and influence in education, this unconsolidated approach was less than ideal because a single captive agency would allow them to promote their agenda more effectively across administrations. Eventually, the National Education Association made a deal and backed the right presidential candidate, Jimmy Carter, who successfully lobbied for and delivered the cabinet level agency. When it was established in 1979, becoming operational in 1980, the agency was supposed to act as a quarterly mechanism. Carter signed the Department of Education Organization Act into law into 1979, believing in part that it would reduce administrative costs and improve efficiency by housing most of the federal education programs that had proliferated in the wake of Johnson's war on poverty under one roof. It has had the opposite effect. Instead, special interest groups like the National Education Association, NEA, American Federation of Teachers, AFT, and the Higher Education Lobby have leveraged the agency to continuously expand federal expenditures. A desirable funding stream from their vantage point, because federal budgets are not constrained like state and local budgets that must be balanced each year. By fiscal year 2022, the department's discretionary and mandatory appropriation topped $80 billion, not including student loan outlays. Each of its programs has attendant federal strings and red tape. One recent example is the Biden administration's requirement that state education agencies and school districts submit equity plans as a condition of receiving COVID recovery, ESSER funds in the American Rescue Plan, ARP. This exercise led to the hiring of numerous new government employees. As the rules were promulgated, plans were created after collecting public feedback, and those plans were eventually deemed satisfactory. The next administration will need a plan to redistribute the various congressionally approved federal education programs across the government, eliminate those that are ineffective or duplicative, and then eliminate the unproductive red tape and rules by entrusting states and districts with flexible, formula-driven block grants. This chapter details that plan. As the next administration executes its work, it should be guided by a few core principles, including advancing education freedom. Empowering families to choose among a diverse set of education options is key to reform and improve outcomes, and it can be achieved without establishing a new federal program. For example, portability of existing federal education spending to fund families directly, or allowing federal tax credits to encourage voluntary contributions to K-12 education savings accounts managed by charitable nonprofits could significantly advance education choice. Number two, providing education choice for federal children. Congress has a special responsibility to children who are connected to military families, who live in the District of Columbia, or who are members of sovereign tribes. Responsibility for serving these students should be housed in agencies that are already serving these families. Number three, restoring state and local control over education funding. As Washington begins to downsize its intervention in education, existing funding should be sent to states as grants over which they have full control, enabling states to put federal funding towards any lawful education purpose under state law. Number four, treating taxpayers like investors in federal student aid. Taxpayers should expect their investments in higher education to generate economic productivity. When the federal government lends money to individuals for a post-secondary education, taxpayers shouldn't expect those borrowers to repay. Protecting the federal student loan portfolio from predatory politicians. The new administration must end the practice of acting like the federal student loan portfolio is a campaign fund to curry political supply and votes. The new administration must end abuses in the loan forgiveness programs. Borrowers should be expected to repay their loans. Safeguarding civil rights. Enforcement of civil rights should be based on a proper understanding of those laws, rejecting gender ideology and critical race theory. Stopping executive overreach. Congress should set policy, not presidents, through pen and phone executive orders, and not agencies through regulations and guidance. National emergency declarations should expire absent express congressional authorization within 60 days after the date of the declaration. Bolstered by an ever-growing cabal of special interests that thrive off federal largesse, the infrastructure that supports America's costly federal intervention in education, from early childhood through graduate school, has entrenched itself. But unlike the public school bureaucracies, public employee unions, and the higher education lobby, families and students do not need a Department of Education to learn, grow, and improve their lives. It is critical that the next administration tackle this entrenched infrastructure. Needed reforms. Federal intervention in education has failed to promote student achievement. After trillions spent since 1965 on the collective programs now housed within the walls of the department, student academic outcomes remain stagnant. On the main National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, reading outcomes on the 2022 administration have remained unchanged over the past 30 years. Declines in math performance are even more concerning than students' lack of progress on reading outcomes. Fourth and eighth grade math scores saw the largest decline since the assessments were first administered in 1990. Average fourth grade math scores declined 5 points, and average eighth grade math scores declined 8 points. Just 1/3 of eighth graders nationally are proficient in reading and math. Just 27% of eighth graders were proficient in math in 2022, and just 31% of eighth graders were scored proficient in reading in 2022. The NAEP long-term trend assessment shows academic stagnation since the 1970s, with particular stagnation in the reading scores of 13-year-old students since 1971, when the assessment was first administered. Math scores, though modestly improved, are still lackluster. Additionally, the department has created a shadow Department of Education, operating in states across the country. Federal mandates, programs, and proclamations have spurred a hiring spree among state education agencies, with more than 48,000 employees currently on staff in state agencies across the country. Those employees are more than 10 times the number of employees, 4,400, at the Federal Department of Education, and their jobs largely entail reporting back to Washington. Research conducted by the Heritage Foundation's Jonathan Butcher finds that the federal government funds 41% of the salary costs of state education agencies. We're on page 323, or page 324 shows a chart of trends in fourth and eighth grading. Page 324 shows a chart, the mandates for leadership, the conservative promise, trends in fourth and eighth grade reading. Eighth grade reading average scores. And in reading this chart, I don't want to have that interpretation incorrect, as well as a chart for fourth grade reading average scores. And the sources, the nation's report cards, national average scores, grade 4, as well as the nation's report card, grade 8. So these are the nation's average scores by heritage.org. On page 325 and page 358 of 922 on the PDF, we're going back to the Department of Education. This bloat has persisted for decades. In 1998, a commission led by Representative Pete Hochstra released a critical report based on extensive fieldwork, interviews, and analysis of the Department of Education. The report, Education at a Crossroads: What Works and What's Wasted in Education Today, detailed the suffocating bureaucratic red tape Carter's agency had wrapped around states. The commission estimated that states completed nearly 50 million hours of paperwork just to get their federal education spending, which at the same time they estimated resulted in just 65 cents to 70 cents of each federal taxpayer dollar making its way to the classroom. The the situation has worsened since the Hoekstra report. More recent evidence of Washington's bureaucratic paperwork burden can be found in the growing number of non-teaching staff in public schools across the country, which doubled relative to growth in student enrollment from 1992 to 2015. This labyrinth nature of federal education programs, convoluted funding formulas, competitive grant applications, reporting requirements, etc., has likely contributed to the considerable bureaucratic bloat in state and local school districts across the country and is one of the key areas of needed reform. Streamlining existing programs and funding so that dollars are sent to states through straightforward per pupil allocations or in the form of grants that states can put toward any lawful education purpose under state law would bring a needed easing of the federal compliance burden. The federal government should confine its involvement in educational policy to that of statistics gathering agency that disseminates information to the states. To improve educational opportunities for all Americans, the next administration should work with Congress to pass the Department of Education Reorganization Act to reform, eliminate, or move the department's programs and offices to appropriate agencies. The following is an overview of what should happen within each of the offices and to each of the programs currently operated by the department. Program and office prioritization within the department. Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, OESE. The OESE is comprised of 36 programs ranging from Title I, Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and Impact Aid to programs for Native Americans and the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. Reduce the number of programs managed by OESE and transfer some remaining programs to other federal agencies. Number 2, transfer Title Part A, which provides federal funding for lower income school districts, to the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically the Administration for Children and Families. It should be administered at a no strings attached formula block grant. And number 3, restore revenue responsibility for Title I funding to the states over a 10-year period. OESE also currently manages the Federal Impact Aid Program, which provides funding to school districts to compensate for reductions in property tax revenue due to the presence of federal property, such as that associated with the military base or tribal lands. Eliminated impact aid not tied to students. Number 2, move student-driven impact aid programs to the Department of Defense Education Authority, DODEA, or the Department of Interior's Bureau of Indian Education. Number 3, transfer all Indian education programs to the Bureau of Indian Education. Number 4, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, which provides vouchers to low-income children living in the nation's capital, appropriate as DC is under the jurisdiction of Congress, should be expanded into a universal program, formula funded, and moved to the Department of Health and Human Services. All other programs at OESE should be block granted or eliminated. Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. Transfer the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education's few programs to the Department of Labor, but move the tribally controlled post-secondary career and technical education program to the Bureau of Indian Education. Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS. The Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS, houses nearly 24 programs, ranging from funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and the National Technical Institute for the Deaf to Special Olympics funding and the American Printing House for the Blind. Most IDEA funding should be converted into a no-strings formula block grant targeted at students with disabilities and distributed directly to local education agencies by Health and Human Services Administrations for Community Living. Transfer the vocational rehabilitation grants for Native American students to the Bureau of Indian Education. Phase out earmarks for a variety of special institutions as envisioned. To the extent that OSERS supports federal efforts to enforce our laws against discrimination of individuals with disabilities, those assets should be moved to the Department of Justice, DOJ, along with the Office for Civil Rights, OCR, Office for Post-Secondary Education. The next administration should work with Congress to eliminate or move OPE programs to ETA at the Department of Labor. Funding to institutions should be block granted and narrowed to historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and tribally controlled colleges. Move programs deemed important to our national security interests to the Department of State. Institute of Education Services, IES, Sciences. Institute of Education Sciences, IES. Move EB's Statistical Office, the National Commission for Education Statistics, NCES, to the Department of Commerce's Census Bureau. If Congress believes the federal government can play a valuable research role, those research centers can be moved to the National Science Foundation. If Congress decides to maintain IES as an independent agency, it needs to address major governance and management issues that keep it from being a productive contributor to the knowledge base related to teaching and learning. Office of Federal Student Aid, FSA. The next administration should completely reverse the student loan federalization of 2010 and work with Congress to spin off FSA and the student loan obligations to a new government corporation with professional governance and management. With a statutory charge that is preserved, the federal student loan portfolio for the benefit of the taxpayers and students, this new entity would be one, professionally governed by an agency head and board of trustees appointed by the president. On page 328, we come to chart 2, and page 361 of 922 of the download, trends in 4th and 8th grade mathematics. 8th grade math scores, average scores of 2022 are at 274. 4th grade math average scores in 2022 are at 236. And in 2019, they're at 241. And so they're declining. And this is the source, is the nation's report card. The national average scores for grade 4 and from March 17, 2023, and grade 8. Then when you get to page 329, chart 3, long-term trends for 9 and 13-year-olds. Reading average scores for 13-year-olds are on average from 2012 at 263 for 13-year-olds, at 263 to 260, so they're declining. And for 9-year-olds in 2012, it was at 221, and now it's 220, so just about the same. Math average scores for 13-year-olds in 2012, it's 285 for 13-year-olds and declined to 280 in 2020. Math average scores in 2012 for 9-year-olds were at 244 in 2012. In 2020, it was declined to 241. This is the nation's report card, NAEP Data Explorer as the source. With the advice and consent of the Senate, funded with the annual appropriations from Congress and operated by professional managers, federal loans will be assigned directly to the Treasury Department, which would manage collections and defaults. The new Federal Student Loan Authority would manage the loan portfolio, handle borrower relations, administer loan applications and disbursements, monitor institutional participation and accountability issues, and issue regulations. Office for Civil Rights, OCR. OCR should move to the Department of Justice. The federal government has an essential responsibility to enforce civil rights protections, but Washington should do so through the Department of Justice and federal courts. The OCR at DOJ should be able to enforce only through litigation. Additional bureaus and offices. For those attorneys, accountants, experts, and specialists in the department's remaining offices, subject to closure, whose positions might nevertheless be a key component of serving the mission, positions that might include the office of the secretary, deputy secretary, office of the undersecretary, office of the general counsel, office of the inspector general, office of finance and operations, office of the chief information officer, office of communication and outreach, and office of legislative and congressional affairs. The opportunity to join other agencies based on their expertise and the needs of other agencies should be made available. For example, OGC, higher education lawyers, would join the newly independent Federal Student Aid Office or the Department of Labor, and OGC civil rights attorneys would join DOJ. These positions must first be determined to serve a continued mission need prior to being transferred. Attorneys, accountants, experts, and specialists in the department's remaining offices subject to closure and whose positions are indispensable to serving the mission should have the opportunity to join other agencies. Current laws relating to the Department of Education that require repeal. In order to fully wind down the Department of Education, Congress must pass and the president must sign into law a Department of Education Reorganization Act or Liquidating Authority Act to direct the executive branch on how to devolve the agency as a standalone cabinet level department. Congress should pass and the next president should sign the Department of Education Reorganization Act, current promulgated by or relevant to the agency that should be rolled back or eliminated. While the next administration works to distribute department programs across the federal government, it will need to thoroughly review many education-related regulations promulgated by the Biden administration. There are 5 primary regulatory targets as of December 2022 that require the next administration's attention. Regulations on number 1, charter school grant program priorities. Number 2, civil rights data collection. Number 3, student assistance general provisions, Federal Perkins Loan Program, and William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program, final regulations. Number 4, non-discrimination on the basis of sex and education programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, Title IX. And number 5, assistance to states for the education of children with disabilities, preschool grants for children with disabilities, equity in IDEA. The next administration should also review regulatory changes to the school meals program under the Department of Agriculture and changes to the income-driven student loan program. Additional Biden administration regulations on number 1, gainful employment, administrative capability, and financial responsibility for institutions that participate in the federal student loans and grant programs. Number 2, Title VI. Number 3, accreditation of post-secondary institutions. And number 4, female athletics are expected to be released in 2023. Thorough review the many education-related regulations promulgated by the Biden administration, as well as the school meals program and the income-driven student loan program. Charter school grant programs. Congress first authorized the Charter School Program, CSP, in 1994, Title X, Part C of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, ESEA, as amended 20 USC 8061, ET Sequence 1994, Title 10. It most recently reauthorized the program in 2015 as part of the Every Second Student Succeeds Act. On March 14, 2022, the department published a notice concerning proposed priorities, requirements, definitions, and grant selection criteria relating to the award of federal grants to applicants in CSP. This proposal increases the federal footprint in the charter school sector by ignoring statute and adding to the list of requirements imposed on charter schools. The new administration must take immediate steps to rescind the new requirements and lessen the federal restriction on charter schools. Civil rights data collection. On December 13th, 2021, OCR published a notice concerning proposed revisions to OCR's mandatory civil rights data collection, CRDC, in which it proposed to create and collect data on a new non-binary sex category in addition to the current male or female sex categories, and to retire data collection that indicates the number of high school level interscholastic athletic sports in which only male and female students participate. Number two, high school level athletics teams in which only male or female students participate. And number three, participants on high school level interscholastic athletic sports teams in which only male or only female students participate. These poorly conceived changes are contrary to law, fail to take account of student privacy interests and statutory protections favoring parental rights under the Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendments, and jettison long-standing data collections that assist in the enforcement of Title IX. The new administration must quickly move to rescind these changes, which add a new non-binary sex category to OCR's data collection and issue a new CRDC that will collect data directly relevant to OCR's statutory enforcement authority. Student assistance general provisions, Federal Perkins Loan Program, and William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program final regulations. Effective July 1st, 2023, the department promulgated final regulations addressing loan forgiveness under the HEA's provisions for borrower defense to repayment, BDR, closed school loan discharge, CSLD, and public student loan forgiveness, PSLF. The regulations also included prohibitions against pre-dispute arbitration agreements and class action waivers for students enrolling in institutions participating in Title IV student loan programs. Acting outside of statutory authority, the current administration has drastically expanded BDR, CSLD, and PSLF loan forgiveness without clear congressional authorization at a tremendous cost to the taxpayers, which estimates ranging from $85.1 to $120 billion. The new administration must quickly commence negotiated rulemaking and propose that the department rescind these regulations. The next administration should also rescind Dear Colleague Letter DCL Gen 22-11 and DCL Gen 22-10, and its letters to accreditation agencies dated July 19, 2022, which are attempts to undercut Florida's SB 7044, providing universities more flexibility on accreditation. Non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, Title IX. With its notice of proposed rulemaking published on July 12, 2022, the Biden Education Department seeks to gut the hard-earned rights of women with its changes to the department's regulations implementing Title IX, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in educational programs and activities. Instead, the Biden administration has sought to trample women's and girls' athletic opportunities and due process on campus, threaten free speech and religious liberty, and erode parental rights in elementary and secondary education regarding sensitive issues of sex. The new administration should take the following steps. Number one, work with Congress to use the earliest available legislative vehicle to prohibit the department from using any appropriations or from otherwise enforcing any final regulations under Title IX promulgated by the department during the prior administration. Number two, commence a new agency rulemaking process to rescind the current administration's Title IX regulations. Restore the Title IX regulations promulgated by then Secretary Betsy DeVos on May 19, 2020, and define sets under Title IX to mean only biological sets recognized at birth. And number three, work with Congress to amend Title IX to include due process requirements, define sets under Title IX to mean only biological sets recognized at birth, and strengthen protections for faith-based educational institutions, programs, and activities. The Trump administration's 2020 Title IX regulation protected the foundational right to due processes for those who are accused of sexual misconduct. The Biden administration's proposed change to the interpretation of Title IX disposes of these rights. The next administration should move quickly to restore the rights of women and girls and restore due process protections for accused individuals. At the same time, there is no scientific or legal basis for redefining sex to sexual orientation and gender identity in Title IX. Such a change misrepresents the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion in Bostock, threatens the American system of federalism, removes important due process protections for students in higher education, and puts girls and women in danger for physical harm. Facilitating social gender transition without parental consent increases the likelihood that children will seek hormone treatments, such as puberty blockers, which are experimental medical interventions. Research has not demonstrated positive effects and long-term outcomes out of these treatments, and the unintended side effects are still not fully understood. We're on page 334 of the Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. Bullet point, the next administration should abandon this change, redefining sex to mean sexual orientation and gender identity in Title IX immediately across all departments. On its first day in office, the next administration should signal its intent to enter the rulemaking process to restore the Trump administration's Title IX regulation, with the additional insistence that sex is properly understood as a fixed biological fact. Official notice and comment should be posted immediately. Bullet point, at the same time, the political appointees in the Office for Civil Rights should begin a full review of all Title IX investigations that were conducted on the understanding that sex referred to gender identity and/or sexual orientation. All ongoing investigations should be dropped, and all school districts affected should be given notice that they are free to drop any policy changes pursue pressure from the Biden administration. The OCR Assistant Secretary should prepare a report of OCR's actions for the new Secretary of Education, who should, by speech or letter, publicize the nature of the overreach engaged in by his predecessor. The Secretary should make it clear that FERPA allows parents full access to their children's educational records, so any practice of paperwork obfuscation on this front violates federal law. Title VI, School Discipline and Disparate Impact. Assuring a safe and orderly school environment should be a primarily consideration for school leaders and direct administrators. Unfortunately, federal overreach has pushed many school leaders to prioritize the pursuit of racial parity. In school discipline indicators such as detention, suspensions, and expulsions over student safety. In 2014, the Obama administration issued a Dear Colleague letter that muddied the standard for civil rights enforcement under Title VI for student discipline cases. Before the DCL, a school will be in violation of federal law for treating Black and white students differently for the same offense, disparate treatment. Under the Obama administration, schools were at risk of losing federal funding if they treated Black and white students equally aggregate differences in the rates of school discipline by race, the disparate impacts. OCR leveraged federal civil rights investigations as policy enforcement tools. These investigations could only end when school districts agreed to adopt lenient discipline policies, commonly known as restorative justice. Academic studies, as well as student and teacher surveys, suggest that academics and school climate have been harmed substantially by this push. The Trump administration rescinded the Obama administration's guidance on school discipline and corrected the Obama administration's overreach in Title VI enforcement. The next administration should continue the policy of the Trump administration in this area and direct the department to conduct a comprehensive review of all Title VI cases to ascertain to what extent these cases include allegations of disparate impact. OCR should also review all resolution agreements with school districts to conform with this policy. As part of this effort, the new administration should also direct the department and DOJ jointly to issue enforcement guidance stating that the agencies will no longer investigate Title VI cases that exclusively rest on allegations of disparate impact. To the extent that the Biden administration publishes guidance of promulgates at regulation on this topic, the next administration should rescind the guidance and commence rulemaking to rescind the regulation. Getting the federal government out of the business of dictating school discipline policy is a good start. But if the next conservative Department of Education simply rescinds the Biden era regulation, it could very easily be enforced again on day one through a dear colleague letter by another leftist administration. In addition to rescinding the policy and any related guidance, the next secretary should work with the next attorney general on a regulation that would clarify current regulations to state that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not include a disparate impact standard. As law professor Gail Harriot has noted, the alleged existence of a disparate impact standard under Title VI makes everything presumed illegal unless given special dispensation by the federal government. Although it would require political capital from the White House, given that mainstream news outlets are sure to frame it as an attack on civil rights, the next conservative administration should take sweeping action to assure that the purpose of the Civil Rights Act is not inverted through a disparate impact standard to provide a pretext for theoretically endless federal meddling. Assistance to states for the education of children with disabilities, preschool grants for children with disabilities, equity in IDEA. Effective January 18, 2017, the department issued final regulations under Part B of IDEA that require states to consider race and ethnicity in the identification, placement, and discipline of students with disabilities. The new administration should rescind this regulation. Students should never be denied access to special education services because of their race or ethnicity, but this is happening in school districts across the country thanks to the Obama administration equity and IDEA regulation. This was not the intent of the regulation, but it is an inevitably byproduct of its flawed assumptions. The Obama administration looked at the racial statistics on special education assignment and made two assumptions: that African American students were disproportionately overrepresented, and that this overrepresentation constituted a harm that required federal pressure to ameliorate. School districts deemed to overrepresent minority students in special education assignment or in discipline amongst special education students are tagged by their state education agencies as engaging in significant disproportionality and are required to reallocate 15% of their IDEA Part B money into coordinated early intervening services that are intended to address the root causes of disproportionality. In practice, this can mean raiding special education funding to pay for CRT inspired equity consultants and professional development. This is especially problematic given that both of the assumptions both of the assumptions behind equity in IDEA are flawed. Special education services provide extra assistance to students. They do not harm them. And according to the most rigorous research on the subject conducted by Penn State's Paul Morgan, Black students are actually underrepresented in special education once adequate statistical controls are made. That means that this regulation effectively further depresses the provision of valuable services to an already underserved group. The next administration should immediately commence rulemaking to rescind the equity in IDEA regulation. No replacement regulation is required. The Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS, should prepare a digest of the best research on this subject and share it directly with state superintendents and state special education leaders across the country who have been led by this regulation to believe a false problem diagnosis. Every effort should be made to dissuade states from continuing to operate on the assumption that overrepresentation requires state intervention after the federal pressure is rescinded. Provide school meals to children in need. Do not use federal meals to support radical ideology. In May 2022, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, tried to advance a radical political agenda using the federal school meal program. Nearly a century ago, federal lawmakers adopted the National School Lunch Program, NSLP, and School Breakfast Program, SBP, and other services that provide meals for K through 12 students to give children from low-income families access to food while at school. Since the 1940s, federal lawmakers have generally expanded these meal programs, creating an entitlement for nearly all students, regardless of family income levels, and have turned the meal programs into some of the most wasteful federal programs in Washington. Now, the USDA is threatening to withhold federal taxpayer spending for these meals from students that do not implement Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972. So that term sex is replaced with sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI. The next administration should prohibit the USDA or any other federal agency from withholding services from federal or state agencies, including but not limited to K-12 schools that include not to replace sex with SOGI in that agency's administration of Title IX. The administration will have significant support for this policy change among state officials and members of Congress. 22 state attorneys generally filed a lawsuit after the USDA's announcement that the agency intended to withhold spending from schools that do not replace sets with SOGI. Members of Congress also introduced legislation in 2022 that will prohibit the agency from carrying out its intentions regarding Title IX. Phase out existing income-driven repayment plans. While income-driven repayment plans, IDR, of student loans is a superior approach relative to fixed payment plans, the number of IDR plans have proliferated beyond reason. And recent IDR plans are so generous that they require no or only token repayment from many students. The Secretary should phase out all existing IDR plans by making new loans, including consolidation loans, ineligible, and should implement a new IDR plan. The new IDR plan should have an income exemption equal to the poverty line and require payments of 10% of income above the exemption. If new legislation is possible, there should be no loan forgiveness, but if not, existing law will require forgiving any remaining balance after 25 years. President Biden has proposed a new income-driven repayment program that will be extremely generous to borrowers, requiring only nominal payments from most students. It would turn every policy lever to the most generous setting on record. For example, lowering the percentage of income owed from 10% to 25% under existing plans to 5%, lowering the number of years of payment required from 20 or 25 years to 10 years, and increasingly income exemption from 150% to 225% of the poverty line. The median borrower who earns an associate degree would owe only $15 a month, regardless of how much or he or she had borrowed. The median bachelor's degree borrower would owe only $68 a month. This plan essentially converts these student loans into delayed grant programs. Other structural reforms that the Department of Education requires: the reform federal education data collection, the National Assessment of Education Progress, NAEP, and other data collections currently release data by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English language proficiency, disability, and sex. However, one of the most important, if not the most important, factor influencing student educational achievement and attainment is family structure. As educational scholar Ian Rowe has noted, NAEP already collects data on students' family structure. It just does not take those data publicly available. The Department of Education, or whichever agency collects such data long term, should make student data available by family structure to the public, including as part of its Data Explorer tool. As discussed above, data collection efforts should be consolidated under the Census Bureau. Data collection efforts in higher education should be improved by housing higher education data at the Department of Labor. This would provide more transparency in evaluating post-secondary education and workforce training program outcomes, contextualize those results based on trends observed more generally, enable the adjusting of real wages to account for regional differences in earnings and cost of living, and develop a reliable methodology for risk adjusting institutional and program outcomes to more accurately reflect the value added of educational programs, as opposed to their admissions selectivity. Currently, the Department of Education relies on graduation rates and average earnings as proxies for educational quality. Both of those outcomes, however, are highly dependent upon the student's socioeconomic background, sex, family status, and other factors. Colleges and universities with selective admission policies post the strongest outcomes, primarily because they admit mostly low-risk traditional students. Open enrollment institutions post the weakest outcomes, largely because life is challenging and complicated for low-income and non-traditional students who may be forced to drop out when a work schedule changes. A child needs more attention, or an unexpected repair or medical bill makes continuing impossible. Such confounding factors make it difficult to isolate the impact of educational quality versus socioeconomical factors on student outcomes. The Department of Health and Human Services face similar challenges in trying to evaluate healthcare outcomes, since social determinants of health result in worse health outcomes among those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, have low educational attainment levels, have struggled with addiction, or have poor diet and exercise habits. Without risk adjustment of outcomes, hospitals treating wealthy patients will always appear to be delivering good care, and hospitals treating low-income patients will appear to be delivering poor care. Higher education outcomes data should be similarly risk adjusted to more carefully isolate the impact of educational quality versus socioeconomic status and other factors on college outcomes. Reform the negotiated rulemaking process at ED. The U.S. Department of Education is required by statute to engage in negotiated rulemaking prior to promulgating new regulations under Subchapter 1 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as well as Subchapters 11 Teacher Quality Enhancements, and IV, which is 4, of the Higher Education of 1964, Student Assistance. The purpose of negotiated rulemaking is to engage a committee of stakeholders early in the drafting of proposed regulations to ensure that the regulation can be implemented as written, to understand any potential unintended consequences, and to seek suggestions from stakeholders on alternative solutions. The goal is for the negotiators to reach a consensus, thus smoothing the way to promulgate a new rule. Although it's helpful for the department to receive stakeholder inputs, the negotiated rulemaking process has become an expensive and time-consuming undertaking. Consensus is only rarely reached, enabling the department to pursue its own path. The department's master calendar, which requires final rules to be published by October 1st, if they are to be implemented by July 1st of the subsequent year, compounds the problem, making it unduly challenging to update regulations as needed to keep pace with changes in education, finance, accounting, pedagogy, and student assessment. In recent decades, negotiated rulemaking has become a veritable three-ring circus, replete with negotiators who use their Twitter accounts and other social media feeds during negotiations to denigrate the process and their peer negotiators in real time. A few members of Congress use the public comment process to deliver political speeches, apparently to raise their own profiles, but without adding any new information to the process. Some advocacy groups have latched onto the process for fundraising purposes, sometimes misrepresenting negotiation language to agitate followers and supporters and encourage them to make financial contributions. At times, the department itself has appeared to sabotage consensus, which enables them to write the regulation as they wish and without regard to the concerns raised by negotiators. The Department of Education should work with Congress to amend the HEA to eliminate the negotiated rulemaking requirement at a minimum. Congress should allow the department to use public hearings rather than negotiated rulemaking sessions. Reform the Office of Federal Student Aid. This proposal urges the new administration to end the abuse of FSA's loan forgiveness programs, to manage the federal student loan portfolio in a professional way, and to work with Congress for a long-term overhaul of the program for the benefit of students and taxpayers. The new administration must end the prior administration's abuse of the new agency payment pause and the HEA loan forgiveness programs, including borrower defense to repayment, closed school discharge, and public service loan forgiveness. The new administration should also take immediate steps to commence the rulemaking process to rescind or substantially modify the prior administration's HEA regulations. The federal government does not have the proper incentives to make sound lending decisions, so the new administration should consider returning to a system in which private lenders backed by government guarantees will compete to offer student loans, including subsidized and unsubsidized loans. This would allow for market prices and signals to influence educational borrowing, introducing consumer-driven accountability into higher education. Pell Grants should retain their current voucher-like structure. So on page 340, 374 out of 922, we're going to go ahead and take a break here. And while we're breaking, go ahead and jump into the Random Acts of Kindness community and share at the tab and go down to the tab of the Project 2025 in 60 seconds. Leave and share one random act of kindness that you can give someone else by watching this Project 2025 mandate, and leave a comment here and to be able in the community to be able to grow and submit your ideas for random acts of kindness. So Adriane Mayes, AI Genius and president of CCC Because We Care Foundation. We're going to go on a break. We'll come back into about an hour, and don't forget to leave in the comments, share, and to anyone that can't actually read this 900-page mandate to be able to have this document to take a listen to, free of charge. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn, and it's on at Adriane Mayes. So again, let me take care of this responsibility. See you back here at around 5:36ish. I can, I will, I must. Let's go. Don't forget to leave a comment. What up, dope? Detroit, one product, educate. Let's go.